Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. Tonight we have returning guest, one of my favorite guests to have on this show, Paul Anthony Wallis. If you're not familiar with him, he is an author, researcher, Archdeacon in the Anglican Church. We're talking ancient alien stuff tonight. That's why I love to have Paul on. He's the author of Escaping from Eden and The Scars from Eden, and he has a new book coming out May 1st, is Echoes of Eden. I love the cover of this book. We'll show it later. But yes, for all you people that know, I'm a big ancient aliens kind of guy. My feelings about the Bible is a lot of ancient alien stuff. Some people don't believe that. That's fine. But I see evidence of aliens everywhere. I'm not saying Ancient Aliens, the TV show, gets it right all the time, but somebody who I think really does and has the research to back it up and really knows how to talk about it is Paul Anthony Wallis. So if this is your first time ever seeing Paul on the show, well, you're in for a surprise. And if you've seen him before, you know it's going to be well worth it to stay tuned tonight. And of course, we got a lot of weird to get to in the World Wide Web of weird. I also just saw director Ivan Reitman, Ghostbusters director, just passed away. That's real sad news. Also, Josh Turner from Paranormal Roundtable, I saw had a medical scare. But I did see, for people who are Josh Paranormal Roundtable Wolf fans, he is home. I saw his wife post. So big well wishes to Josh. Hopefully fast recovery. He's going to be back on doing his stuff. We all want to see Paranormal Roundtable come back, but just want Josh to take care of himself. So got a lot to get to, so let's go ahead and get rolling into the show. Welcome to another night of Paranormal Soup. As I said before, I'm your host, Jason Bland. Tonight's guest, Paul Anthony Wallis, he's going to be here. He's in the panel, but we'll have him on for his interview after our new segment, after the World Wide Web of Weird. Joining me, as always, is my beautiful co-host, Jamie D. How you doing tonight, Jamie?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Excited to have Paul on again to talk about ancient alien stuff. That's one of my favorite topics. I know I have all kinds of favorite topics in the paranormal realm, but this is one really close to my heart because, I don't know what to call it, my religious beliefs. Me and my wife say we go to the Church of Ancient Alien, because I see a lot of that in there, but it's a topic I thoroughly enjoy. As always, my other co-hosts from St. Augustine, Florida, Rob Autry himself from Weird Wednesday, and Jamie D. and Rob from Weird Wednesday. How you doing tonight, Rob?
Doing marvelous.
Glad to have you here. Paul will be, he's here in the panel, but he'll be joining us after the World Wide Web of Weird, after our commercial break. But like I said, we have a lot of weird to get to, so let's go ahead and roll into the World Wide Web of Weird. Tonight on the World Wide Web Weird, I know we're going to be talking about ancient aliens and all that goodness, Anunnaki, Sumerians, Book of Enoch, all that goodness. God, it's such good stuff. But tonight we'll talk about a little bit less ancient alien story that's been going around quite a bit. Decades-old photo of Apollo 9 mission is making the rounds of a UFO. For those listening on the Paranormal Radio Network, Paranormal Soup Radio Network, we are a webcast. We do show photos, sometimes videos. No videos tonight, but I read the articles and narrate as best as possible. And this first one I've been seeing making quite a bit of rounds, and this is like a zoomed in of it. I should have put the other photo, the real NASA photo. And I got this. You can go to Coast to Coast AM has this by Tim Binnell. But I've seen a lot of different articles on it. Coast to Coast has a short article. Has a link to the actual NASA photo, and when you see it, it's like, where's the UFO? They had really zoom in for this one, but it's a big back photo of the Earth. Decades-old photo from the Apollo 9 mission is making the rounds online, as some suspect that the peculiar triangle shape spotted in the background could be some kind of alien craft. The image in question, which you can see in full context here, which I have a link on the article, was taken by astronauts during the spacewalk on March 8th, 1969. Earlier this week, the picture popped up on a popular YouTube channel devoted to UFOs, space anomalies, which subsequently led to a number of media outlets highlighting the intriguing photo and wondering what the anomaly could be, something extraterrestrial. I think it was it Secure Team 10 they had this one? I don't remember. They don't list it. Appearing to be thousands of miles away from the astronauts and seemingly lingering in the outer atmosphere of Earth, the object has drawn comparisons to the Black Knight satellite, an alleged clandestine craft that conspiracy theorists believe is orbiting our planet and being kept secret by proverbial powers that be. Should the image look familiar to dedicated UFO researchers, that's because it was not actually recently discovered. It has been circulating on various forums and websites for the past few years, and every few months it winds up being heralded as a new find. And like I said, it's been really popular lately. As far out the object could be, if not an alien craft or ET satellite, UFO researcher Scott Brando argues that the anomaly is in fact merely a photographic imperfection that was produced when the original NASA image was processed digitally back in 2004. I've been seeing people post this around. I think there's a lot of interesting NASA photos. I don't know if this is one of them, but I saw this circulating around.
How far away is it supposed to be?
Like 1,000 miles or more.
That would make it pretty huge to be able to see it.
Yeah. I mean, to my sources, my squadron member was a French pilot. He said these things were pretty big. They're like, football field big, But I don't know about that big. I don't know. All right, let's move on. More not so ancient alien stuff here. This is a downed UFO spotted in Antarctica on Google Earth. Anomaly hunters scouring Google Earth satellite images for strange and unusual objects spotted a peculiar triangular shape, another triangle, sitting on a frosty surface in Antarctica. Some suspect it could be some kind of downed craft from out of this world. The weird find, which can be examined more deeply, if you go to the link here, this is Tim Binnell again from Coast to Coast, was featured on the popular paranormal YouTube channel MRMBB333. Standing out amidst a vast and untouched swath of tundra between two mountains, the oddity somewhat resembles a boomerang and appears to have left a legendary trail of disturbed snow behind it. This is actually pretty peculiar if you see it. I went and looked at it myself on Google Earth. The original, if I remember right, the original Roswell craft, it wasn't a boomerang shape, but it was more of a V kind of shape than a UFO. So, and definitely, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, they were more of this kind of shape. It's from his description. So I'm really interested in this one. I mean, I've seen it on Google Earth. I don't know who's going to trek up there to find it. But if we can find it on Google Earth, our government satellites have already spotted a long time ago. I would think. But
it's just a boomerang. Move along.
Nothing to see here. Move along, people. But if it's really a UFO, you wonder if they went up there to check it out.
Yeah.
It would be a hard way to recover it all the way out there. They might not be able to recover it. And it's just sitting there for anybody who wants to try, I guess. I don't know. But I think it is interesting, that it could be just some anomaly of a mountain the way it is or something like that. Just the way the snow creeps. It just could be a complete optical illusion. I don't know. Who knows? All right, let's move on.
UFO. Not saying it's aliens, but,
Like I said, we're going to be talking about ancient aliens tonight, but I believe the aliens are still here. And this next article from Unexplained Mysteries, German university camera system is designed to detect UFOs. Perched high atop the Julius Maximilians University Wurzburg building in Bavaria, Germany, the unassuming gray box is a new eye in the sky for UFO researchers. The brainchild Håkan Kahl, if I pronounce it right, a professor of science and technology. The new camera system is the latest in a series of prototype models currently in operation on the university's roof, and missions to detect and analyze UFOs. Most of these observations concern known phenomena or objects such as birds, aircraft, and satellites or clouds, says the professor, but for a very small portion, the cause remains unexplained even after intensive investigation by experts. So they're already catching UFOs with this thing. Skycam 5 camera works by continually watching the sky while using machines learning algorithms to automatically dismiss known phenomena and other false detections. So they don't have to sit there and review hours and hours. Anybody can put a camera up there. I know some people, real nice cameras that do this, and they review all the video. This takes all that out of the thing. It's going to alert them. Like, you need to watch this part of the video. This is something this AI cannot identify as a normal thing in the sky. That's pretty awesome. Kahl himself admits that it's still early days. However, over time, he intends to secure additional funding so that more cameras can be set up to expand the system. Imagine, okay, I think this is brilliant. This guy gets the funding, and they get these cameras, and they start putting them all over the world. Because that's what it takes. It's just constantly watching. We talk about the disclosure movement and everything happening. It's just a matter of time till it's proven they're here, undeniably, in my opinion. That's why I think you're seeing governments get out in front of this. With technology, where we're going with cameras and drones and surveillance, we surveil the hell out of ourselves. We're surveilling the hell out of our skies. It's just a matter of time before it's just like, okay, there's no way that's us. That's no way our technology. That's what we're dealing with here. So I think this is awesome. More cameras in the sky for UFOs. And it's a snowball effect too. Once it's proven beyond a doubt, and then everybody's going to start questioning all the stuff, Roswell and all these other things, and they are already, but when it's really proven, no denying, no jokes anymore, it's the real deal, that snowball effect will happen. People start asking questions like, wow, technology, and how do they have the technology? Do we have the technology from crashed UFOs to have like free energy? And that's what our next article is about, is nuclear fission breakthrough. And these articles drive me nuts because I've had doing this 6 years now. I always cover like new energy technology a lot in World Wide Web of Weird, and they're always like one so close step to nuclear fusion. It's always this kind of article. Here we go from Unexplained Mysteries, and they just grab this from somewhere else. Nuclear fusion expert in England has reported a huge step forward in the quest to produce limitless energy. Often seen as the holy grail of power generation, nuclear fusion is the same process that produces energy in the sun and works by fusing hydrogen and nuclei together to create helium. Unlike nuclear fission, which comes with an inherent risk of meltdown, fusion is much more cleaner and safer, while the hydrogen fuel used by the process is so abundant that it's particularly limitless. Physicists have been attempting to build a working nuclear fusion reactor for the purpose of energy generation for over 60 years. However, success has always remained tantalizingly out of reach. And that's my point. It's always just there. I think our government has. I think we have something way beyond what they're even trying to do. And that's what pisses me off. Because literally you could change. I understand it would probably destroy our whole economic system. the petrodollar would, or we have the petrodollar here. It would literally, we already got hyperinflation. It's saying that would be a joke compared to what would happen if we got free energy. But eventually, we'd get out of those growing pains. Might be a World War III with it. I don't know. We're going to get there anyways. But then we'd have clean energy. Because right now, I mean, as it stands, if like humans just stopped doing anything, like humans disappeared from Earth, or like a bunch of people died, and there was nobody to man these nuclear fission plants, what would be left? Radiation, lots of it once they start melting down. That's why I can't stand The Walking Dead sometimes, like in other shows that are post-apocalyptic. It's like, is there anybody manning those nuclear fission plants? Because if not, you all should be dead right now. Even the zombies. I don't know about zombies. Probably the only thing left if the radiation doesn't kill the zombies, but probably would. All right, let's move on. But it's always, like I said, it's always like one step out of. I think we had the scalar energy thing in Tesla. I mean, I think there's a lot of different roads to cleaner, freer energy that have been completely blocked.
It's like 50 Fukushimas happening all at once.
Yeah. Only one other show, like there's 2 TV shows I've said that I've seen actually cover that, and that is Last Man on Earth. They got it right, and The 100. All right. Terrified haunted doll weeps tears of acid and tries to set itself on fire. Now you can buy on eBay, right? I think that's where this guy got it. Terrified haunted doll, which weeps tears of acid and tries to set itself on fire, has been rescued by a ghost hunter after a house fire. The doll, named Annie, and similar to those featured in classic horror movies, was bought by a fan of the supernatural calling himself Matt Paranormal, who was intrigued by its history. The horrifying doll was discovered in the house fire, which the owners tragically died, making it all more frightening. This is from the Mirror. Matt, age 33, Wexham, Wales, said, after reading about her history with the house fire, I knew I wanted to buy her. See, I want to know, inquiring minds want to know, where'd you buy her? eBay? You sure it was a fire? I'm just saying. Yeah, because people sell bullcrap dolls on eBay that are haunted all the time. After purchasing Annie 2 years ago, Matt experienced a whole host of strange occurrences, including a doll trying to set itself on fire. He claims its previous owners appeared next to her in images and witnessed the doll crying acid tears. The supernatural fan spotted Annie at an auction in the U.S. and was keen to buy her, so he got her at an auction. Somebody got it at eBay. I'm just there's so many haunted dolls for sale. I don't get the market. Like, you saw, Annabelle said, not the real deal. That's a horrible movie, but I'm sorry. But real haunted dolls, the ones that are supposedly like the Warrens say was haunted and all that stuff, I don't think you want to bring it into your home. I understand the want to have haunted collected items. Like it's great if you have a separate non-dwelling living place to put them, like away from you. And even then, it might not help you because if they're cursed, and you own it, sometimes that curse follows you. I don't know. It just sounds like a bad time. He said she cost him $100 after he had her imported to the UK. I had my paranormal equipment installed into her as I thought her previous owner's spirits would be attached to her. Into her. What do you do? Put his recording? I don't know. Not going to say. It wasn't until last year that Annie actually started to cry. I believe that when she cries, it is her attachments. Way of showing emotions. He says the doll's weeping followed the death of her owners, who are in denial that they have passed away. He claims means they are demons who will not let go of their former lives. I don't get that part. I just see all these haunted doll stuff, and I'm just like, why would you want that? I mean, I get you're a paranormal researcher. I hope he doesn't have it in his home.
I'm Chucky. Want to play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just.
It's a movie. I know.
I'm in the paranormal and researching it, but I would never bring a haunted item in my house, even without children in my lives. I still wouldn't bring a haunted doll in my house. But at the time, I think they're BS.
Never do something like that.
Never. There's only a couple behind me, but I mean,
there's only a couple.
Or put things.
But I mean, do you really?
Bed.
Do you think all the dolls you have, are haunted?
Not all of them, no.
No. Yeah. Maybe this one is. It might be. I definitely think dolls can be haunted. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
Just like, how can you tell them out of the thousands and thousands that are on eBay?
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I don't know. It just seems there's so much of this now, haunted dolls.
Yeah, Sam that used to live here, she just bought a doll off eBay not too long ago, and it's pretty daggum creepy looking.
Anything happen?
Well, her daughter always, that's 1.5 years old, always waves and talks to it and stuff. So
Oh, that's creepy.
yeah.
Mommy, can I play with the doll? No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a child. It's a doll. Like, why can't I play with that?
Yeah.
You know.
Maybe
Just
she is.
'cause-
Maybe she's actually talking to it. I don't know. I don't question
creepy.
these things.
Sam should record that.
Yeah.
Remember these cute times when you talked to a demonically possessed doll? It was so cute. Okay. All right. And then we have to have a continuing story of this lady. You remember Eduardo, the ghost, and the lady marrying him? I don't remember her name. I remember Eduardo. Woman who wants to marry a ghost says they're arguing over wedding date now. You remember this? Yeah, now their wedding date, they can't get set. Brocade, 38, is a singer-songwriter from Oxfordshire and fell in love with Eduardo. She says is the ghost of a Victorian soldier last year. Don't mess with my article. God bless it. There we go. Okay. Like all couples, they have times of tension. The most part are extremely happy. Eduardo and I are currently arguing over the wedding date. Brocade says, I want a summer wedding, but he hates the heat. He's a ghost. Like, would it matter? Okay. He hates the heat. And I'd secretly love to make him melt, but he disappears often enough. Seriously, like... For Reese, we got nowhere with it, so I'm going to design a Ouija board of wedding dates to see which one we are both drawn to. She swears he turned into a complete groomzilla and his last demands. See this, I mean, at one point do we go, are you serious, lady? I believe people when they have relationships with ghosts. I've known people who have. I believe that is a real phenomenon, not just like people who have had like forced interactions with spirits that are real negative, but I believe there are people who have serious, like do have a relationship with spirits.
I believe
But I don't think it's this
woman
lady.
really has something going on.
Yeah, something going on, all right.
Well, if they're arguing now, just wait till they get married.
They communicate through the usual means. Ghost often sends cryptic messages in the shower.
Writing it in the steam.
It's from the metro.co.uk, by the way. Eduardo still leaves subliminal messages in the shower and shows his emotions by sending hot and cold sensations through my body. Whatever it is, I need to ask him. He finds a way to communicate it back. It doesn't just lay in the perimeters of what some people class as normal, but who wants normal? I get you, lady. I get you. However, marrying a ghost is proving to be a very difficult task. A couple have been shunned from numerous churches. I wonder why. Because the situation seems relationship as blasphemous, or they just think she's crazy. The finding the venue has proven really tricky. We've been kicked out of a few churches and have been threatened with exorcisms already. I want a huge white wedding, but a lot of people just can't see the vision or see the groom.
Groom, yeah.
Boom, that was me. I'm sorry, I did that. I'm a jerk. I know. But yes, the continuing story of Brocade and Eduardo. Love story from the other side.
From the beginning.
I can see why churches wouldn't want to participate.
The thing is, when I make jokes about this, people understand I do believe there are people who have actual relationships with ghosts, not just sexual, but have like actual relationships with other people on the other side. I believe that. I do believe that. I'm not making fun of that. The stories just get so much more outlandish. Just like the guy who married a sex doll. It's just like, hey, Brocade, do you have more wedding news? What's going on with you and Eduardo? Like the Metro just calls her up. We need an article to get people's attention. I don't know.
Well, currently we're arguing right now.
Can you give us a follow-up on your relationship?
Okay. And then last one, big shocker. This one's a big shocker. Oh, my God. I can't believe the CIA has been spying on Americans again. No, they never stopped. They never stopped. I love this article. It's still Unexplained Mysteries, taken from somewhere else, but again, in parentheses. No, still, they never stopped. The Central Intelligence Agency has reportedly been collecting data as part of a previously undisclosed program. Oh, shock. According to Senators Ron Wyden and Martin Heinrich, the CIA has been covertly conducting warrantless surveillance as part of two separate data collection efforts. This seems to have been going on both since despite the 2013 disclosure by whistleblower Edward Snowden of mass data collection through extensive internet and phone surveillance. Until then, officials had stringently denied that this was going on, even going on so far as to lie under oath. Named PRISM, the operation was ultimately deemed unlawful by the U.S. courts. Now it seems as though the CIA is doing the same thing again. No, they never stopped. A declassified report relating to one of these two new programs was released on Thursday. However, a request to gain access to the information by others was refused. Of course it was. Wyden and Heinrich have accused the agency of undermining democratic oversight and posing risks to long-term credibility of the intelligence community. The public deserves to know the nature and the full extent of the surveillance, the pair argued. These reports raise serious questions about what information our CIA is vacuuming up in bulk and how the agency exploits that information to spy on Americans. Yeah. Again, it's not again. It's always. It never stopped. Okay.
Plus, now they've got different tactics, and they don't really have to spy as much when we're giving it to them openly. Also,
that's my next point. See, what the CIA does now is like, oh, we're not doing it. We're just buying all the data from Amazon and Meta and everybody else, and and then using our own system, the AI system, filtrate all that and try to find those terrorists, right? No, that's not what they're doing. It's blackmail stuff. It's dirty. It's very dirty. Snowden, to me, is a hero. He got it right. He warned us. He said it never would stop. It's still going on. He's warned us a billion times.
I saw him in the news the other day again, too.
Yeah. I know there's people that criticize Snowden, but to me, you know what? You wouldn't have been aware of any of it if it. I mean, of course, we all knew it was going on, but you wouldn't really have the proof of it if it wasn't for him. Just saying. But that's it for the World Wide Web of Weird. Our guest tonight is Paul Anthony Wallis. He's the author of Escaping from Eden, Scars from Eden, and a new book coming out May 1st, Echoes of Eden. I cannot wait to talk about this. Yes, one of my favorite topics, ancient aliens, Book of Enoch, all that goodness. Ancient alien goodness, I know. I cannot wait to talk with Paul about that. But we're going to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we will have Paul on. And I'm there we go. I am rusty with my bumper music. Wow. We'll have Paul on to talk about this. We'll open up the phone lines later in the show after the second commercial break. So just hang in there if you want to talk to Paul. Offer your own insights, what you believe about the Bible, the ancient past. Was there a pre-human civilization, pre-alien civilization? Were we created by aliens? My belief. What's yours? Call in later in the show. Let us know. But we're going to go to commercial break. We'll be right back.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Of the second kind, physical evidence of a UFO. Close encounters of the third kind, contact. From Steven Spielberg, the director of Jaws, comes one of the most ambitious and unusual films ever made. And what you will see has never been seen before. It's a cosmic mystery crossing what many scientists believe will be the next threshold of human experience. It is called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It begins in an Indiana town and leads to one inescapable conclusion. We are not alone. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Certificate A. Now showing at the Odeon, Leicester Square.
The international chart-topping, haunted horror of Haverfordwest has been described as terrifyingly real, a must-read, shocking and chilling brilliance, genuinely worrying, utterly frightening. Don't read before bed. Described as one of the spookiest writers out there, best-selling author G.L. Davies presents Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest. The true paranormal account that is shocking the world. Dare you enter? Dare you read? Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. Pray you never have to live there.
This is the sound of a space clock aboard a U.S. satellite 180 miles above the Earth. No one winds up this timepiece. It's powered by a tiny battery, a battery that delivers power for years without replacement. Now the same type of battery, the Duracell battery, can bring new reliability and long life to your battery-operated equipment. Radios, cameras, toys, all run far longer. Duracell batteries, the long-distance power cells, outlast any ordinary battery. The same type of battery that keeps space clocks running for years can bring long life to anything powered by batteries. Dura, as in durable. Cell, as in power cell. The Duracell battery, made by Mallory.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Switch to DCS ranging.
240, nominal to profile.
We're in the pipe, 5 by 5.
Tonight on Paranormal Soup, our guest is Paul Anthony Wallis. Paul is an internationally best-selling author whose books probe world mythologies and ancestral narratives for their insights into human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. As a senior churchman, Paul served as a church doctor, a theological educator, and archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia, and has published numerous titles on Christian mysticism and spirituality. He's a popular speaker at summits and conferences around the world. His 2020 book, Escape from Eden, Escaping from Eden was hailed by George Noory as the generation's Chariots of the Gods, propelling Paul into the international stage as the go-to guy in the field of paleocontact. The internationally best-selling sequel, The Scars of Eden, is endorsed by Erich Von Daniken. His new book, Echoes of Eden, is due to be released May of this year. In collaboration with Fifth Kind TV, Paul's interviews and documentaries are watched by millions worldwide. This is Paul's, third, fourth time he's on the show. I can't remember how many times. We've had him on several times. I could talk to Paul all night about ancient past, aliens, the book of Enoch, the Popol Vuh, or you could say the Mayan religious texts. All these things lead to my basic philosophy that what many of you read in the Old Testament of the Bible isn't God as per se, but more ancient alien. And there's evidence of that through all ancient cultures of something intervening. And we're going to talk about that tonight. Open your minds to the idea if you haven't before. If you haven't ever gotten into this discussion or heard these kind of topics, boy, welcome to the rabbit hole you're about to go down. And we will open up the phone lines later in the show, but let's go ahead and get to our guest. Welcome back to the show, Paul. It's an honor to have you back on. Your new book, Echoes of Eden, comes out this May. I am so excited for this book to come out. We'll share the cover of it here in a little bit. I actually love the cover of this book. And we've had you on several times to talk on this topic. And a lot of different stuff I'd like to get into tonight that we haven't even got into, because I watch you have a YouTube channel and you're on Fifth Kind TV. So there's a lot of stuff that I've been wanting to get into because we always run out of time tonight. But I want you, I have some new listeners tonight to kind of give a background of who you are more than just what I gave in the bio, and and what's led you down to this path of seeing basically aliens behind what people think are God in the Old Testament.
Sure. Well, first of all, g'day from Australia. It's great to be with you again, Jason. I love our conversations. So by way of an introduction, my background is in church ministry. I was for 33 years in church-based ministry as a church doctor, as an archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia, which is kind of a troubleshooter, and as a theological educator, training pastors in the principles of hermeneutics and in the history of Christian thought. And hermeneutics are the principles by which you study ancient texts and try and get out of them what the writer intended you to get out of them, rather than reading stuff in or making mistakes. How do you get to what the author intended? And so these were the things I taught. And in teaching that subject, we would look at something called source analysis, which is where you ask, where did this text come from? And how does it differ from the source version? And why does it differ? And then we'd do something called form analysis, which is what kind of literature is this? Is it a diary entry? Is it history? Is it poetry? Is it theology? Is it philosophy? Is it a proverb? Is it something else? And then always you'd ask the fundamental question, what do the words mean? And it was actually through those disciplines, which in theory are the disciplines of every preacher who preaches from the Bible, that was actually what led me down the rabbit hole into the world of paleocontact, drilling down into the root meanings of keywords and asking questions about texts and stories that just didn't quite fit neatly and tidily with the orthodox worldview that preachers generally are invited to repeat from week to week. There are just these texts that don't quite make sense, moral anomalies in the behavior of the God character, that if you've got the time, you'll go back and you'll say, okay, what's really going on there? And that was what I did, and that was what led me to escaping from Eden and discovering a whole world of ancient ET contact.
See, when I was a kid, my mom had a copy of Chariots of the God by Erich Von Daniken, and I got my hands on that. And to me, when I read that book, it made so much more sense to me to look at the Old Testament. Before that point, I would look at it as just not real. That's how I looked at it when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But Erich Von Daniken opened my eyes. I'm like, I think this is a historical record happening here in the Old Testament. But Yahweh is a jealous God, right? Well, I don't think it's a God. I think that's an alien. and it's stuck with me ever since. And I every time I look into it, I mean, I know it's my perspective to think that maybe it's wrong. And I've had great conversations with my Christian friends on this who believe differently, but in the end, my perspective has always been changed since Chariots of the Gods I look at it as, must be aliens, the ancient aliens. I was Ancient Aliens before there was a TV show.
Well, I'm with you, Jason, and I had the privilege to talk to Erich Von Daniken last year, and he believes that there are about 10 key words that if you go back to the root meanings, the ET narrative of the Bible becomes blindingly obvious. I found that in my own research. And so some of the key words were the Elohim word, which is often translated as God, but the root meaning is the powerful ones. And when in the plural, that's right, plural behaviors, they get into fights with each other. Thousands of human beings are slaughtered in their conflicts. So that should clue us that something else is going on there than the story of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I found when you reread the Elohim stories as the powerful ones, just using that translation, what emerges is the summary form of the Mesopotamian narratives on which they're based. So you've got words like that, or words like angels, that you've got to drill down and say, what does that really mean? What kind of entity is that? You come across stories of hybridization in Genesis 6. That's how the story is told at face value.
Yeah.
So what kind of entity is that? But then you've got other vocabulary as well, which not only speaks to non-human players in the story, which is something the Roman Catholic Church has now acknowledged, and acknowledged about a decade ago. You've got technological words in there as well. Words that mean craft, words that mean equipment. And then you've got metaphor that we read and we know what we're looking at. We're looking at a wormhole. Intervening generations of translators had no idea what a rocket launch looked like or what a wormhole looked like. We read those texts and we think, wait a minute, I think I know what they're saying here. And then you go back to a text like Ezekiel, where the writer's talking about a life form that was like a human being and that flew this equipment around southern Iraq. It is very difficult when you do the translation work on the basis of root meanings to go back and read it the old religious way. Once you've read it that way, it is like taking the red pill in the Matrix.
It is.
A whole new world opens. You cannot see it the old way again. It's just not possible.
That's what I'm saying. Like I want to be open-minded. My Christian friends, I'm trying to, that don't believe this. And you're Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ too, but I don't call myself a Christian because they have a certain set of beliefs that I don't agree with. I read the Old Testament completely different than they do. And I don't see how that's ever going to change. Not seeing anything to me, it makes a lot more sense. Well, one, I don't believe in a jealous God, for one.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. There are all sorts of things like that stare you in the face. Any child will ask you how a God of love can genocide a planet of human beings with a flood and still be a God of love. Or when people are begging him for forgiveness, he says, no, I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to punish you for 7 generations. Does that really sound like the God of Jesus?
No.
But, it's been a confused matter right from the get-go with Christianity, because right at the beginning of Christianity, there was this big argy-bargy about what to do with the Hebrew scriptures. Were they going to be the scriptures for Christianity or not? And there was a big tussle and a fight about it. It seems in retrospect clear that Jesus distanced himself from those scriptures. And that's why when you get to Acts 15, the apostles said, no, the Hebrew scriptures are not going to be the foundation of Christianity. You don't have to believe them to be a Christian. You don't have to obey those laws to be a Christian. And one of the reasons they did that was because there were moments when Jesus kind of clues us that something else is going on in those stories that have nothing to do with God. And one of the most amazing moments comes in the gospel, where Jesus says this. He says, what father, if his child asked him for food, and and drink, would give him a stone. Or if he asked him for fish, would give him a snake. Now, to the modern ear, you'd think, well, how would Jesus come up with that awful scenario? Here's a child who's hungry and thirsty, asking for food, and they get given a stone and a snake. But it's not a random illustration. He's actually referring to stories about Yahweh in the Hebrew scriptures, in which his people were begging him for food and water. He gave them a stone and told the leader how to get water out of the stone. And then when they complained about their emergency rations, he sent snakes to bite them. And only those who would worship the image of the snake would be saved from a slow and painful death. And Jesus is saying, what kind of father treats his children like that?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very dramatic way of him making very clear that what he means by God and Father is totally different from that story about Yahweh, which actually belongs to the world's body of stories about dragons ruling over our ancestors in the deep past.
Yes.
And whether it means that literally that it was another life form, or whether it's referring to their technology, people can debate about that. But what's very clear when you do the translation work is there was a time when our ancestors were governed over by non-humans, and Jesus is distancing himself from all those stories and certainly doesn't regard them as a revelation of God.
And how confusing for the early Christian church, because this is from the words of Mark, Luke. They're his apostles giving what he taught them, but it doesn't seem like they were fully grasping what he was trying to tell them at the time.
That's right. Even in the New Testament, you can hear them trying to think through, almost as they're writing, the implications of these things he said. Sometimes the gospel writer will make a little footnote. Oh, in so saying, he was declaring all foods clean, in case it wasn't clear, because they struggled over those all through the book of Acts. You can read.
They were
and
Israelites. They were Israelites.
That's
He's trying to
right.
break them of a whole belief system.
Exactly.
But in
And
the
they
end,
had read-
they end up merging it, and I don't think that was the intent.
No, it wasn't. And the early church fathers had that debate. And so there were church fathers who believed what you do, Jason, and what I do, that if you take some of these stories as God stories, you end up with a God who's a monster. And they said that can't be right. If we're going to use these scriptures as scriptures, we're going to have to handle them differently to that. And so they had an argument about that. But some at the far end of that spectrum who were saying, look, we don't need to refer to those books at all anymore. Remember Acts 15? Well, those were the ones, unfortunately, who got thrown out as heretics.
Yep.
And so Christianity is run with this confused image of God from that time to this. But what convinced me that people like Clement of Alexandria and Origen and Marcion were right in saying these are dragon stories, not God stories,
Yes,
is that when you do the translation work, they line up with ancestral narratives from all around the world, and in remarkable detail sometimes.
it's like the same theme being played out in different stories,
Exactly.
different plots.
And what we were saying earlier about technology, the same kind of technology, how it looked, how it sounded, what it did, what it was used for. You can find that in African, Mesoamerican, Sumerian, and in the biblical stories.
One of the things that you talk a lot about, it comes up in your research, and I got really interested in is the Book of Enoch. This is something totally pushed out of the Bible. I've talked to Christians like, well, it's not part of the Bible. I'm like, okay, I get that, but it comes from the same same writers pretty much. It comes from the same people who are writing the Old Testament. It's what it just got edited. A publisher said, nope, no, we're going to exclude that, basically. Just like your media does you. It's saying doesn't mean you shouldn't go read it and inquire.
No, that's right. And in fact, it wasn't completely pushed out of the Bible. If you go to Ethiopia and read their Bibles, the Coptic Orthodox Bible has the Book of Enoch in it. And in the canonical Bible of the Western Church, you read Genesis 6, it will tell you a summary form of a big chunk of the Book of Enoch. If you go to the Book of Jude, when he refers to the Enoch of Genesis 6, he quotes the book of Enoch almost word for word. So those two writers, Genesis and Jude, assume you know the story from another source, i.e. from the book of Enoch. And look, there may have been reasonable grounds on which not to have it in the primary canon. Somebody in the comments on the Paul Wallace channel the other day described the book of Enoch as fan fiction. So, you know, you've got the
I've heard
canon
somebody else say
Star
that
Trek,
too.
and then you got the fan fiction. And in a sense, that was what the Jewish scribes believed when they decided it shouldn't be in the primary canon. But as you just said, Jason, that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it.
Yeah.
And it does have information in it that's supported by canonical books and by other cultures around the world. And in particular, this idea that our ancestors achieved their great leap forward on planet Earth because of intervention from beyond planet Earth. So the leap forward in agriculture and in civil engineering, in medicine, these kinds of things, the money system, the legal system, they all popped up from nowhere. So it seems when we read of human origins, and many cultures around the world say, no, it didn't pop up from nowhere. We were visited and we were given tuition in those things.
Well, you know what, the things they taught humans, it, to me, has to be somewhat of an insight to who it was. You know, saying what they must be like, because I mean, they taught humans how to put on makeup. You know, they taught them cultural things. You know, the beyond just survival. They, you know. I mean, there's even, you know, stories like you go back to the Sumerian text of the Anunnaki liking certain foods to be cooked for them, you know. Yeah, it's like they affected us in all these different cultural ways. And then you get into even our obsession with gold. If you get back to the mines that are 200,000 years back for gold, I mean, what would we want with gold at that time in early human civilization? I mean, humans barely should be clunky apes around that time period.
Indeed. One of the things that it's almost amusing, but it's fascinating when you read how the Babylonians described the visitors who taught their Sumerian ancestors. Because if you talk to anthropologists, it's the great leap forward in the Fertile Crescent that fascinates them.
Yeah.
It's the appearance of the Sumerian culture from out of nowhere with, you know, writing, money systems, legal systems, banking systems, astronomy, that's right, civil engineering, sanitation. How did they get that? Well, there's a Babylonian story that talks about how it happens, and it says that a being called Oannes and the Apkallu turned up and taught our distant ancestors all these things. Now, that's an amazing story in itself. Before we go into any further detail, but the thing that catches my attention is that when that story describes the initial reaction of the human beings living in the fertile plain to these other beings turning up, the reaction isn't how clever they are, how much information they have to give us. It is, what are they wearing?
But that's an honest reaction, though.
Yeah,
you know?
Why do their clothes cover nearly all their bodies? And what is it made of? It's like the scaly, silvery skin of a fish, and you can almost picture them fingering it as they work out how to describe it. And the fact that you've got that visual reaction and that puzzlement over why do they look so different, to me, that has the ring of truth. And it's later into the story that we realize, oh, actually, they were very clever, and it's from them that we got this, and this. And it's those visual correlations often that clue us that the agreement among narratives around the world isn't because they've had the same book and they've retold the same story. They're actually finding ways of reporting their own visual memory of what happened.
I mean, look at, like, you know, the Vedas of India. Look at the Popol Vuh, where you say it for the Mayans. All these scenes are the similar story. I mean, or the Greeks and the Titans. I mean, all these things. It's the same deal as the Old Testament. If you change it out to extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or whatever, it makes a lot of sense.
It does, and the most commonly recurring theme is the hybridization story.
Yes.
You can hardly find a culture on the planet that doesn't, in its ancestral narratives, speak about a time when the visitors hybridized with human beings because they wanted to be more like us. They wanted some of what's in our gene pool in their gene pool. And the details that recur are so unlikely, and they don't fit with any human pattern of behavior. That in itself, just that one element of the story, is enough to catch your attention and take you on a journey around the world.
Well, the Book of Enoch really does get into like the Watchers and the Nephilim. And if you look at like the Greek stories of Hercules and, I mean, of these, God Zeus mating with women, God himself mating with women, besides the other gods mating with women, they create these titans, these giants, just like the Nephilim. And we've heard the story, we hear the abduction stories now. And if you compare that to these ancient stories of Enoch himself, I mean, he's a contactee. The experience he's describing is not very dissimilar to an experience of like Travis Walton.
No, indeed. It's very similar. And people who describe these phenomena today are repeating a story that is thousands of years old. We listen to experiences today. If someone says, "Oh, I think I have an alien baby," we think, "Oh, $50 from the National Enquirer." That's that story. Instead of saying, "Do you know our ancestors have said things like this for thousands of years?" The whole of Europe is named after a woman who said that. The whole of Europe is named after Europa, who was impregnated by this entity called Zeus. We call them Greek gods, but he was flesh and blood enough that he could hybridize with Europa, who was a Phoenician princess, and produce 3 children. And, we say, mythical children. Well, yes, but the Minoan culture was descended from Minos, one of those children, and that was a real culture.
Right.
And if you are brought up in Greece and you study ancient history, you'll be taught that as ancient history, not as world mythology. Go to Josephus, the Jewish historian in the year dot, and he believed that anomalous giant people living at that time were the end result and the evidence of the stories of the hybridization that's referred to in Genesis 6. And he says, in Greek legend, the Greek legend of the Titans. So Josephus said exactly what you did, that this is actually a real flesh and blood part of our human history that's been recalled by cultures around the world. And there are sometimes these little linguistic clues that we're hearing the same story. In the Bible, there are the Anakim. Anakim are the giant people who descended from Anak. But then you've got other stories of Anaks, or Anak with a Q in the Quran. The Anactorians is the Greek version of the story. And you think, what? Anak, Anaks, Anakim, Anunnaki.
Yeah.
Might they be related? And I think they might be.
Yeah, I've always felt it's just these subtle clues. You're talking about several different cultures here, but all influenced from the main source, which is Sumerian, coming together, and they're all mirrors, or what do you want to call it, ghosts of this ancient culture and the references to it, but it's still something going on. One of the things I think we get confusion on, too, is when we think about aliens come here, we think about physical beings and ships and all that, but there's also, I do think there is some credit that there is something interdimensionally going on. There's something dimensionally happening in this too. It's
Definitely.
not, you used to talk about wormholes and stuff like that, that there are beings that are ethereal or not physically, that are interacting us in some kind of dimensional way.
Yeah, definitely. And that's exactly where I've gone in Echoes of Eden, because in Escaping from Eden and the Scars of Eden, I'm talking at the very concrete level of beings who visited our planet, beings who governed us in the past. And in Echoes of Eden, I go into other ancient stories where the contact phenomena suggest interdimensional contact and interdimensional beings. And some of our great cultural and spiritual sources root their claims and their ideas in stories of interdimensional contact. So Plato would be an example of that, where he talks about information he derived by having contact with entities in another dimension and achieving that contact through an altered state of consciousness. The authors of the Corpus Hermeticum say exactly the same thing. And there's a very interesting moment in the story of the Bible where the Elohim, the powerful ones who used to govern, are no longer on planet Earth. And so the priests and kings and prophets have to find a way of doing remote communication.
Right.
And they use very similar protocols to Plato and the writers of the Corpus Hermeticum. And they are protocols to do with achieving interdimensional contact. Now, our ancients had language for that, whether you're listening to Aboriginal Australians or ancient Celts or Native Americans. They all have language for interdimensional contact in the deep past and in the present. And if you listen to shamanic healers, even those operating in the world today, that is very often their paradigm. And as I research for Echoes of Eden, I realized that is an unbroken story as well that goes on for thousands of years, that says we are actually in the company of other entities. We're surrounded by them. We just can't usually see them. But there are protocols for tuning in and working out who and what they are and what they might have to say to us.
See, and I think that's the part where a lot of people get confused on this subject. You know, like, well, so you believe it's all just these physical aliens that came back and did all this? What about this? You know, no. You know, I think there's a lot bigger picture to all this that's going on here. And Jesus is a big clue to that. You know, there's something definitely interdimensional going on with Jesus. You know.
Oh yes, we see there's an amazing interdimensional moment on the Mount of Transfiguration, for instance, where he's in contact with people who are not alive in the present moment or not present in this dimension. There's a little clue like that. The Apostle Paul has a very similar experience where he's clearly in an altered state of consciousness because he says, I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body. And then he describes something he saw in another part of space. So you've got clues like that. There was another place I was going to go with that, but it'll come back to me in a moment.
Well, you know, what I always find interesting, too, about this is, you know, what you mentioned, like they're trying to contact the Elohim, the powerful ones. They've left. They left this planet. That would explain a lot. Because obviously when they were here, they were influencing us. They were doing all kinds of things, and culture and civilization could have been way, you know, this is where I also believe that civilizations collapsed several times, that we had, you know, technology and, you know, flying cars even, or all that kind of craziness way back in the day, and it's just been erased by time.
And then we didn't.
Then we didn't, you know, but, you know, civilization crumbles and rebuilds again. I think there's a lot of evidence to that. But if the Elohim had left, that would explain a lot of the crumbling and the rebuilding and this trying to, you know, their echo. I love the title, the echoes of them throughout our civilization. They're not here anymore. But I still do believe some alien force is here, but they're not the Elohim, are they?
Yeah, I agree with you. The ancient stories talk of a sky council where there's a whole range of ET demographics and interdimensional demographics who have a hand, feel they have a stakeholding in Project Earth. I think that's still the case. I think there may be even more demographics now. So Hayy Mashed, for instance, just before Christmas 2020, was it, said that on the basis of his experience, now he was the Brigadier General who was Israel's chief of space security for 27 years. And he said on the basis of his experience, his understanding is that we're already in contact with an intergalactic federation that's chosen not to self-disclose until we, the human race, have a better understanding of the nature of space. So this federation suggests a large number, and I don't get the impression that the entities that are described by the Sumerians are the top dogs in the story in the 21st century.
Right.
I think it's a much more complex picture, and it may be that it's easier to find evidence of the Sumerians' sky people in what they left behind. if we look at our monarchies, our priesthoods, our money systems, our banking systems, that's what they left behind, the levers by which human society can be managed. And I think their idea when they left was they could still sit at the top of the economic tree without being here. On the other hand, in the Bible, those who they left behind did seem to have difficulty contacting them. So maybe they really did just leave, and then some others came in, and we've got other agendas playing out right now. But right now, I think it's quite complicated what's happening. I think there is not, we talk about aliens, it's not one demographic. We talk about when is government going to come clean and tell us what the aliens want, as if there's only one agenda. I think there's a range of agendas, and I think they conflict with one another. And I think when we see an acceleration in phenomena and an acceleration in disclosure, it's because there's a little bit more tussle going on than usual.
A shift in power.
A shift in power, exactly.
Yeah, see, that's what I've always said. That one of the reasons they're just not going to come out with a full disclosure is not because we're going to lose our minds, is they can't explain it. They can't. It's too complicated. There's so much history, thousands, hundreds, thousands of years of history that like how you disclose that. You can say, yeah, there's aliens, but boy, this rabbit hole is so deep. How much time you got?
Exactly, because it leads on to all sorts of other questions. I think the political fallout is the challenge, not the fallout of panic, because a lot of us have worked out we're already in contact. I think it's the political fallout of how long have you known, in whose interest has this secrecy been maintained, in whose interest are decisions being taken now. That's where we would all go, and it would start getting a little bit messy, especially when all governments like to appear as if they're in charge and know what's going on. We'd suddenly not be in that space at all. But where I go, and echoes, sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, listen to your government kind of deal. Like, you're not going to listen to them anymore if you got some ancient alien coming around and saying, I know we know better. If they started communicating with us, or, people started looking to it as a religion, I mean, it would totally lose control.
Well, I think one of the reasons that the interdimensional and ET story has been shut down for centuries and thousands of years is if you are trying to govern people, particularly if you've just taken over their country, you have to be the news agency. You have to be the arbiter of what's true and what's false. If you've got people running around who are getting other information through interdimensional contact, how on earth can you manage that? How can you police that? If you still have shaman wandering around saying, yes, but our interdimensional overlords have told me this, and the government's not telling you the truth, you can't manage a country like that. And so you either have to rubbish the shaman or demonize him or get rid of him altogether. And that's what plays out throughout human history.
I mean, just look at how the FBI took interest in the 60s to UFO groups like the Venusian Brothers and stuff because of fear of communism, because of what the Space Brothers were telling people, like, living in the money is not a thing. We basically we live in a communistic society. Like what the Space Brothers were telling these people at these conventions was very communistic like, and J. Edgar Hoover didn't like that.
Yeah, well, that was really just a 20th century version of the same issue that has played out through the centuries. You could go back to France in the 1200s, and you've got the same dynamic where you've got the Cathars, who believed they were getting information from higher dimensions and interdimensional entities, and that translated not into communism, but into a far more peaceable, happy society. And the Languedoc in the south of France, it was like going to a different country because people lived in this very simple, humble, pared-back way. The rate of crime was nothing compared with their neighbors. The rate of violent crime, nothing in comparison. And their neighbors saw this. And so they called them Cathars, which meant the good people or the pure ones. And the Cathars had got all this through interdimensional contact. And when the powers of the day, the J. Edgar Hoover of the day, which was Pope Innocent, I can't remember which number he was. I think it was Pope
Yeah.
Innocent III. When he got wind of this, he tried to convert them back to orthodoxy as if they needed converting. I mean, they
Right.
were showing us how to build a better world, thank you very much, but no, it had to be converted back. So he sent in some Cistercian monks. That didn't work. Sent in the Dominicans. That didn't work. So then he sent in his army, and over the course of the next 100 years, killed 1 million people. Up to 1 million people, historians estimate. To give you a sense of scale, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention this word, but in the Second World War, the Nazi war machine killed 0.06% of the world's population directly.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholic Church, when they went into the Languedoc, killed 0.26% of the world's population because they responded to this beautiful society and these empowering ideas as if they were a military threat.
Yeah, because it was a threat to their power because the Cathars
It was a threat to their power.
didn't need a church to
No,
rule them.
that's right.
They found their spiritual within, and the few Cathar, I guess, insights of their ideas and beliefs are very deep. And I mean, it's definitely like this is part of Christianity. Wow, this it gets into like all this like ideas of archons and reality. It's like the Matrix being explored, but
Exactly.
1,000 years ago. I don't know, 500. How
Yeah,
long was it?
it's-
Cathar,
it's-
600 years?
No, it's 1,000 years ago.
1,000
they
years
began,
ago.
And
Yeah.
in the 1200s, they were gotten rid of. Yes, the ideas that they were running with are ideas in the New Testament. They were ideas in Plato. If people want to know what Platonism looks like in practice, well, the Cathars were
Yeah.
doing it. And, as another illustration, I was talking to a guy just recently. He has an incredible story. In Echoes of Eden, I call him Taran. I've changed his name to protect the innocent. But Taran's story begins when he was 5 years old, and his house exploded when it was struck by lightning.
Oh, wow.
And his family found him in the middle of the wreckage, still alive, crouched up in a ball, unharmed, other than he was blind for a short time. He remembers the intensity of this flash. And then in all the time since, he's had periodic experiences of future viewing, precognition.
Wow.
And every so often, he has this experience where he feels that he's suddenly pulled up out of his body, up into the sky. He gets this incredible download of information, and then he comes back down into his body. And he said on one occasion, he came back down and he just had to write down everything that was buzzing around his mind. And the next day when he looked at his notes, it was full of advanced mathematics and quantum theory and advanced physics, things he had never learned at university. And he said his whole impression of life since the age of 5 is that there's the material him going through life on planet Earth, just like anybody else, but it's attached to like another him. It's up in the cosmos somewhere, looking down and feeding him information when he needs it and giving him assistance. Now, when he described that to me, I couldn't believe it because that is exactly what the Cathars believed, and it's how they lived their lives. Somehow they had found a way of making that happen without getting struck by lightning. And it's what the writings of Plato imply should be possible, that there is cosmic information that you and I can both learn to tap. And that's part of the great adventure of life. And that was what the Cathars had, and that was what the authorities found so threatening that they had to get rid of them.
Well, look at Tesla. We were talking about Tesla a couple weeks ago. He would see flashes of light and have downloads of information. And look how he changed society, with technology. So much of that's because of Tesla. And
Absolutely.
And he's not the only one. I mean, there's other people throughout history that have experienced this, and they call it the cosmic consciousness or the collective consciousness or the universal mind. There's something people can tap into. This is what I believe in. My feeling of God. I don't look at God as some guy with a beard on a throne. With angels and all that stuff. I don't. I believe in a source, a force. My Jediism. I believe in this thing that is not female or male or anything like that. It is a collective consciousness of everything, the will of the universe.
Yeah. Well, Tesla is a really interesting case in point. I do hope we're moving towards a time in history when we can start accepting Tesla and tapping his wisdom. I mean, I can't believe at school I learned about James Watt, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Thomas Edison, Marconi.
But did you learn about Tesla?
Tesla? No, absolutely not. And it's because of what you were talking about in the news segment, Jason. What would happen to our power industry? What would happen to the oil companies if suddenly we started using Tesla's technology for tapping free energy? But look at what they did to him. First of all, how his technology and his findings were treated in his lifetime, and then how he was remembered by history. I mean, if you Google him, you'll find out very quickly, oh, what a strange man he was.
Yeah.
Oh,
he collected his poop.
Oh, social skills. Oh, look
Yeah.
how thin he was when he died. He died in poverty. He was a really weird, didn't have any friends.
Recluse.
That's what you'll read. Not our world can change in the most amazing way if we begin to apply what he talked about. Kudos to Doctor Who for shining a bit of light on him in the recent past. Let's get it into the school syllabus. But that kind of demonizing, mockery, ridicule is often how authorities have dealt with information that they would like to police that they can't get rid of, information that's already out there, or people that they can't assassinate because it would be too obvious. If we're not in the realm of invading Central and South America and executing all the priests, if we're going into Ghana, for instance, as the British Empire, we're not going to execute the shamans. We're going to call them witch doctors, idol worshippers, and make you embarrassed if you're seen
Character
in their
assassination instead of real
character assassination. And that's what I grew up with in Great Britain, because there is ancient indigenous wisdom in Great Britain. There are shamans in that culture, but I just knew from when I was very young that strange lady with the long hair that she never cuts, who lives out in the country in that funny looking cottage, and who seems to know all this stuff about local folklore and local medicines, don't go anywhere near. You were made to be frightened of people like that instead of, here is the culture we
Back
can
in the
be
day, they
proud
used to burn them and hang them.
that predates modern science, that predates the Roman Empire. Let's be proud of the information that is ours and that's been passed down through the generations. And so Echoes of Eden look at how that has happened from culture to culture, how the information has survived, but we've been embarrassed or shamed or ridiculed into ignoring it.
I mean, that's happening now. I'm not getting into politics, but I'm just with the media and the way it is.
Oh, yes, I know exactly what you mean.
I mean, I think everybody doesn't matter what you believe politically, can recognize how information is completely manipulated and put into a narrative on either side of a political aisle to make you think, or not think, actually, to, follow, believe this and not question. We're living in, now it's an instant control. Like the entertainment and media industry is the church. They lay down what we should believe or think. And it's just when I do a show like this, I'm trying to get people open their minds, question this stuff, question the reality you've been told for years, because it's not what you've been told.
Yeah.
You've been lied to.
I think
Open
so.
your
I think
eyes.
If you want real news, go to the world of fiction, because it's often in fiction that we get to tell the truth more boldly than if we were on the 9 o'clock news.
Right. I mean, Tesla, like you said, was in Doctor Who, and I've seen some other stuff. The Prestige. You ever seen that? That was, with David Bowie. It was with Prestige, right? Yeah. He played Tesla. He recognized David. I love David Bowie. He recognized the brilliance of Tesla.
Yes.
Imagine, if that technology got out there, if 0 point energy or whatever the aliens are using got out, for America itself, economically, we would completely collapse. Our dollar's based off of the petro.
Yeah, that's right. And that was what Ed Mitchell said. That was his explanation for why we don't have a lot of disclosure around ET contact, because he believed there are technologies associated with that contact that would provide free energy or 0-point energy. And he said many times that that was his passion and that was his motivation for campaigning for greater disclosure. He was ready to see our economies change a bit around that discovery, and I think I'd be up for that too.
It's going to have to. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. In necessity, eventually it's got to happen. Eventually, we can't keep just abusing things the way we are environmentally to keep getting power.
Well, indeed.
I mean,
indeed. And that's another great aspect to contact that we've experienced through the ages. When indigenous peoples talk about first contact, those first conversations with our visitors were about ecology, were about living in harmony with the planet. And they had those conversations back then so that the human beings could survive. And I think we need to talk about it again for the same reason.
I mean, look at so many of the alien abductees' experiences or contactees. So many of them are being warned that we're killing the planet, we're destroying the planet. I mean, back in the 60s, a lot of the Space Brothers kind of thing was about, the nuclear testing and the nuclear weapons. And it is still happening. I mean, I think people are still being warned that the question is, are they warning us because, they're trying to stop something they know for sure is going to happen? I mean, I guess it's inevitable. You give a kid a gun, eventually he's going to pull the trigger. Are they going to, I think the question always comes up is, are they going to interfere or stop us from harming ourselves? And I don't know that answer.
No, I don't know that answer. I do believe that they have stopped and sought to stop us harming ourselves with nuclear armaments.
Or nuclear accidents.
Or nuclear accidents. So, yes.
Chernobyl.
Exactly. So for, what was it, 6 hours, there was a craft observed by hundreds of people adjacent to Reactor 4. And it was their official news that said maybe there was a restraining influence being exercised there to prevent a quarter of Europe being rendered uninhabitable by a full meltdown of that reactor. So if they can intervene to do that, I hope they can intervene in other ways, because I'm a little bit more hopeful of the expertise some of our interstellar neighbors can bring to the party than I am about our current cadre of politicians. I think, we're at a pivot point in so many ways. It would be lovely to see more assistance. And I wonder...
We need it.
I wonder if we are getting it, because you hear it from contactees. Who will say, I had this contact, I had this communication, they're worried about what we're doing to the planet. If they're saying that to Joe Blow, member of the public, then I'm sure they must be saying it at covert government levels as well.
You wonder, if there are people within the government, or even people you see on TV, politicians, or certain people have been contacted at times. They're trying to get through. I mean, stop talking to Joe Blow. You need to talk to these morons. They have the power, because they're not listening to us. They're obviously not listening to us.
I'm glad they're not only talking to the politicians, though.
No, I don't want them to only talk to the politicians, but they need to. Go abduct some of these jerk-offs, please, and tell them what they're. Stop taking the money from big oil and stop taking the money.
Down.
Yeah, and
have a conversation with them.
Yeah, and nuclear fission's not safe. We are creating tons of waste, and I always talk about, like I was saying at the beginning of the show, like it drives me nuts when I see a post-apocalyptic show or movie, and it's years after humans have civilizations fall apart. I'm like, they wouldn't be there. It'd all be a nuclear radioactive wasteland because of the fission plants we have would melt down, just like Chernobyl, and we'd have radiation everywhere.
Yep, I've seen Mad Max. I don't want Australia to be like that.
Right? I always wondered, does Australia have nuclear fission power plants?
Oh, you put me on the spot there. I'll have to Google that. I'll tell you after the break.
Yeah, just what I'm saying. Maybe that's the reason why. Maybe they don't. That's the only reason why in Mad Max, Australia was the only thing left.
We are big into fossil fuels here. I say we. I mean, the government is big into fossil fuels, and we've got so much in Australia by way of natural resources to generate power safely. I'd love some of our neighbours to come and have some conversations with our senior pollies here.
The problem is that what drives me nuts about it is people are like, oh, we could do solar, we could do wind, and like, we don't need to do. There are things we could do. There's technology out there. Baby, it would light cities with.
Yeah, that's right.
Without,
Which is back to Tesla again.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what drives me nuts.
I do think there's evidence that previous civilizations on our planet, that's how they powered themselves. I think there are evidences of ancient power grids that knew the kind of thing that Tesla is talking about, that ought to give us even more of an impulse to say, well, we don't want to be less smart than the people who were here before.
Obviously, we are. Because obviously we are, because all these ancient civilizations that if they had like technology, were using the good stuff. They were doing like 0-point energy power, because obviously they didn't leave million year of radioactive waste behind.
Exactly.
There is some evidence of radioactivity or something that happened in our ancient past, but it looks more like there was a nuclear war in our ancient past at some point in certain areas of the planet.
Yes, it does. Yes, you're talking up around India.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to become the commercial break, but one of the things I want to get in, I saw on your channel, because I tell people that I say I'm not Christian, but I believe in Jesus. Is you covered like a 4-part segment on Jesus in India. I don't know if you wanted to kind of get into that a little bit tonight, and because I find that so fascinating.
Yeah,
I find that topic so fascinating. And some people find it offensive, but you shouldn't. Just open your mind. If you don't believe it, you don't believe it. But the basic idea is right that Jesus, after he started going to heaven after the resurrection, went to India.
That's right. Yeah, and it's you don't have to really undo too much of your Christian faith if you hold it, in order to conceive of the possibility that after the cross, he's alive again and he goes somewhere else. And the reason I think it's worth putting that topic on the table is that it speaks to which cultures we're willing to listen to, because there's one narrative that comes out of Jerusalem about Jesus, and there are other cultures who had experiences of him as well. On what basis do we listen to the one culture and ignore the other cultures?
Exactly.
Why don't we listen to them all and then ask, how does this fit together? That's really the question I was asking by that series.
Well, we'll get into that. We're going to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that, but as well open up the phone lines for you guys to call into the show. Join the discussion. Do you believe in ancient aliens, or do you have a different belief? Just be respectful. We can discuss and have different opinions on this show. But for me, that's where my beliefs lie. I will open and honest with you guys. I believe that ancient aliens did affect us here, that we are still being influenced by them now. Obviously, I believe that. But in our ancient past, our Bible, all religious texts are all descriptions of a phenomenon of something contacting and touching humankind and changing us, creating us. There's so much evidence out there. Like I said, we've done multiple shows on this, and we're going to always talk about this. It's Sunday night. This is my church. Talk about ancient aliens when we come back after a short commercial break.
Into the combined effects of sensory deprivation and hallucinatory drugs. The subject of the experiment is himself, and the experiment is out of control. Ken Russell's Altered States, a film that must not be missed, is in the West End now. Altered States, Certificate X.
Do you wish for more paranormal and spiritual content? The Paranormal Chronicles magazine is a free digital magazine crammed with the very best in paranormal and spiritual articles and features. No sign-up, no subscription, just free reading and knowledge for you. Read today at www.paranormalchronicles.com/magazine.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello, I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Paranation Magazine is a new paranormal magazine based out of Denver, Colorado. Our goal isn't just to give you the best paranormal content out there, but to promote paranormal unity. We're doing this by giving everyone an opportunity to tell their stories and to share their experiences. For more information, follow us on Facebook at Paranation Magazine and soon, paranationmag.com.
I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is the extraordinary travels of a young, alone, and broke psychic in the highly anticipated new book from internationally renowned psychic, medium, medical intuitive, and best-selling author Sherry Dillard. Critics have described I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like as an engrossing memoir, an empowering story of how a broken girl came to accept her psychic gift, a refreshing and fun read. I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is available through Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold.
Edgar Allan Poe wrote Spirits of the Dead with a pen dipped in warm blood. You will see the ultimate in terror with this important all-star cast. Brigitte Bardot, Alain Delon, Jane Fonda, Terence Stamp, and Peter Fonda in Edgar Allan Poe's Spirits of the Dead. Only Poe's demented genius could bring to the screen such horror and evil. Spirits of the Dead stars Brigitte Bardot, Alain Delon, Jane Fonda, Terence Stamp, and Peter Fonda. Directed by three masters of the cinema, Federico Fellini, Louis Malle, and Roger Vadim. Spirits of the Dead is an adventure in terror beyond your wildest nightmares. Spirits of the Dead in color is rated R.
Please, Spock, do me a favor. And don't say it's fascinating. No. But it is interesting.
You're listening to Paranormal Soup, bringing you the weird every Sunday night. Call into the show and join the discussion. The call-in lines are 219-230-4444 or 260-225-9419. Or by Skype caller ID OOJBland00 or JBland Paranormal Soup. And now to your host, Jason Bland.
Tonight's guest is Paul Anthony Wallis, author of Escaping from Eden, The Scars from Eden, and coming up this May, Echoes of Eden. We're talking about ancient aliens, baby. It's one of my favorite topics. I know I got a lot in the paranormal, but this one goes deep down to my earliest beliefs about the Bible when I would read it. I grew up in a very open household where, discover what you believe. very undogmatic in my household with my mom and my dad. They both had different beliefs and both have, open-minded. So this is how I always looked at it after reading Chariots of the God, that what I read in the Old Testament is more ancient alien than it is God. Now, I look at Jesus and everything else as a whole different view, and we might get into that tonight, because Paul has an interesting research into what Jesus did after the resurrection, that he actually went to India. And to some people that, defies your belief in the Bible or Jesus, but to me, it's something I'm interested to hear. I don't know what Jesus did after the resurrection, but I'm interested to find out. I think there's a good chance he might have been in India. There's a lot more to Jesus than just what you get from the Judeo-Christian side of the beliefs. Now, I am opening up the phone lines. You can call in tonight, join this discussion, ask your questions of Paul, or tell us, what do you believe? We're all open-minded here. We all have different opinions. Join the conversation, but let's go ahead and get back to our guest. So yes, one of these things I've always found fascinating is the idea of Jesus, and some people look at it as, Jesus faked his resurrection. I don't look at it as that way. I think he was resurrected, but I think there's evidence that he didn't just take off and go to heaven and that was it. That Jesus did a lot of other things after that point. We just haven't heard that story.
Yes, I think that is possible. Some of us have heard that story and been told to disregard it because it's only Indians and Japanese or French people or English people who reported seeing Jesus in those parts of the world, so we can disregard them.
Right.
And we'll just stick to the Jerusalem story. So that caught my attention when I realized that there was something of that cultural snobbery to what has happened, that we've only listened to stories of Jesus from one part of the world, when we have other countries with a record of his presence there, and their stories support each other's stories. Now, if you read the Gospels and the New Testament, there are actually a lot of clues there that there is wisdom and understanding that has come from, if I can put it this way, international thought, the world of international thought. Paul, for instance, was very clearly a student of Plato. Some of the Apostle Paul's most famous quotes are actually Plato quotes, where he's just changed a word here or there, and it becomes his famous saying. It's very clear Paul knew Plato like the back of his hand. And the international thought that Plato represented, that was the air people breathe. So we shouldn't be surprised to find it there, but it's in the Gospels as well. The whole way the Gospel of John describes Jesus is through a Platonic lens. Now, if Paul was that clever and informed, is it possible Jesus was as well?
Right.
Is it possible that Jesus was as interested in philosophy and world thought as the Apostle Paul was? It was a very international time. Trade routes were very developed, and it is entirely possible that Jesus had seen other parts of the world.
Before the whole resurrection.
Before the whole resurrection.
His uncle Joseph of Arimathea in the 10 Mines.
Exactly. Uncle Joseph was an international trader. If we're willing to accept the stories of other countries, he was involved in trading in tin, which was the main reason the Roman Empire wanted Britain within the empire. If he had traveled with Uncle Joseph, he could have seen a lot of the world, including India. And there are clues that there are connections there in the texts themselves, names, references, stories that run in parallel with stories from the East. So I think it's not too controversial to say that during his lifetime, before his 3 years public ministry in ancient Palestine, that Jesus may have traveled, may have been to India, and that some of the stories from out of India and from out of Tibet may be true, that he stayed in particular places, in Puri, in Leh, learning the precepts and practices of Hinduism and Buddhism before he comes back and gives his own teachings in Palestine. But the controversial aspect of these stories is those stories that come from Japan, France, India, Ladakh, Tibet, and Kashmir, that say, oh no, he was here after. And Kashmir is one of those places. Srinagar is a place that has a tomb of someone who would appear to be out of the Jewish tradition from the 1st century of the Common Era, who was a teacher and a healer, whose name was Isa. And you start listening to the details of this, this is sounding a little bit familiar. And at some point, that tomb has been interpreted by the locals as the tomb of the Jesus we all know. He's been marked with this imprint of 2 feet, marked as the feet of someone who had been crucified. And so when that was made part of the sarcophagus, the claim was made in Kashmir that this isn't just any old healer or any old Isa. This is a person who survived a crucifixion, whether by supernatural means, what we call a resurrection, or that he actually survived it and at some point was ferried away and made his way towards Kashmir. I've been to Kashmir, I've been to Srinagar, and if I wanted to retire somewhere safe after I'd been through a traumatic experience in Jerusalem, I can think of few better places than Kashmir to go. It's absolutely beautiful. But the way the stories meld together, I think, is fascinating. And I think it's important not to prejudge, but to realize that the resurrection stories are far more open than we generally give them credit for. Bear in mind, in the Gospels, Lazarus was resurrected supernaturally, but he still died. He was resurrected, he had more life, and then he died. Could Jesus' resurrection have been similar to Lazarus' resurrection?
Right.
That's a possibility. It doesn't get talked about much. But I do think the cultural aspect is significant, that we have generally ignored Kashmir, Tibet, Ladakh, Puri, Japan, France, England, because what would they know? We will only canonize the Jerusalem version of the story. And I think that's short-sighted. I think these stories might actually inform each other.
And if he's resurrected, he comes back, what's the point if he just gives a couple messages and then takes off? The message he has is important. You think he's going to travel and spread it. You know?
Yes, and of course we've got used to reading these stories through the lens of the orthodoxy that developed. And we forget that right at the beginning, following whatever happened on the cross, there was a kaleidoscope of stories and a kaleidoscope of ideas and a kaleidoscope of theories. And Paul's explanation in 1 Corinthians 15 was only one of those. And then there was a process of narrowing orthodoxy down, pushing some of these other views out, so you then only got the one Jerusalem story instead of the kaleidoscope of Jerusalem stories that we began with. You mentioned the Book of Enoch. It was part of a whole trove of literature that was unearthed in the 1940s in the Nag Hammadi Desert. It was the Book of Enoch, and then a whole load of Gnostic literature that contained these other explanations of Jesus's life before, during, and after the cross. And some of those did speak of the possibility of Jesus having a life beyond what we're told in the canonical texts.
And that's what we're going to get more into that. We do have somebody waiting on the phone line I want to get on. We got Zach on the line. How you doing tonight, Zach?
I'm doing pretty good, brother. How you doing for Valentine's Day?
Oh, yeah, it's now officially, well, it's not officially Valentine's Day yet, not for another 20 minutes for me, but all right.
Be sure to treat your wife right, man.
Yeah. We don't really do much on Valentine's Day, so you're going to make me feel bad.
Thanks for the prompt, Zach.
Okay. Every day for me is Valentine's Day, so it's all right, man.
Oh, you're romantic.
I know.
Get married for 18 years.
My lady's not around for me to hear that either, so there we go. Anyway, I just got 2 questions tonight. Hey, Paul, it's good to see you again, man. How you doing?
Hi, Zach. Thanks for calling in.
So my first question really goes back to the Book of Enoch. So we do know the stories about how the Watchers descended on Earth and they mated with, Earth women. I personally believe that a lot of it was really, the Nephilim were really a concept really of rape on this. But my question is, though, is based on your own research, were the stories of the Nephilim, were this based in fact of who they were characteristically, or do you believe that this was propaganda? Why or why not?
I think when you read the Enoch story alongside other world narratives, I think that takes us out of the propaganda territory. I know there are some scholars who believe that's what we're looking at within the context of the Hebrew canon. But if you go to, the Greek stories of it or the Celtic stories, they just say there was a hybridization that should not have happened, that people or beings came from off planet, hybridized with us, and it created such a controversy among our visitors that awful things happened as a consequence. So when you listen to the Celtic version and the Greek version, that propaganda aspect isn't there. The Nephilim, it's interesting, that word, because it seems to refer to an order of people before and after the flood. But the specific story in Enoch is about entities who may have been interdimensional entities, because there's some hint that they were not allowed to come here as material beings. So they may have breached a prime directive up there before they breached the prime directive here. And then there's a hybridization, and, it is possible that we've got ancient people describing artificial insemination, IVF, but not having the language for it. Or it might be they were so similar that we are really talking about abduction and rape. But the picture seems to be that they were similar enough to us that they could do that, and yet there was something different enough about them that the offspring became the giants and the titans. And I've had some people come to me on my channel, the Paul Wallace channel, and say, how can you have a giant mating with a human being? That's practically impossible. That's not what the story says.
No.
It says they hybridized, and the giants were the result of that hybridization. And I could compare that with what happens with big cats. Down the road from me here at the National Zoo and Aquarium in Canberra, we used to have a liger. And a liger is a big cat where the dad is a lion and the mum is a tiger. And the liger is much bigger than both of them. And the reason is that the growth inhibitor is carried by the female lion and the male tiger. So if you've got a dad who's a lion and a mum who's a tiger, there's no growth inhibitor. So they start off, they're compatible, they have a child, and then the child is different and doesn't stop growing. And I think we're looking at a scenario like that. And when I compare it with other world narratives, I think the Watchers Who Came were actually very similar to us. And so that's why I hold on to the fairly concrete ET aspect of the story fairly confidently. So I don't know if I've answered your question there, but those are my thoughts.
It did answer my question. And my second question goes back to something that you were just discussing briefly about Jesus traveling to different parts of the world as far east as Tibet on this. Because really in the New Testament, I mean, they did give Jesus' ministry as 3 years, and 3 years, you can do quite a bit on this. My question is, in your opinion, why do you think mainstream Christianity doesn't accept a lot of those stories as canon? Because in my personal opinion, I feel that would actually add a lot of credibility over to their religion, because they could say, hey,
that's a good
our
point,
main religious speaker traveled all parts of the world over here and spread the message. I mean, the only real religion that I can really think of that really, goes outside and explain that Jesus traveled to other parts of the world is really the Mormon religion. Yeah. And granted, this is coming from a religion that was founded by a con man. I get that, but they're really the only ones to really say, hey, Jesus didn't just preach his ministry over in, the Palestine area.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Zach. I believe in Jesus. I seek to live by his teachings. I don't feel at all threatened by the idea that there may be other information about him out there. I think the reason that the church really struggles to do business with that is the church wants to be the exclusive mouthpiece for Jesus. It wants to have the monopoly on information about Jesus because it wants to speak with authority about Jesus. The idea that there are other cultures who know stuff they don't know, I think that's the difficult thing. It's a little bit like when we were talking about disclosure earlier in the political fallout. I don't think the church should take that view. I think we should listen to all the stories we have about him. It doesn't mean we have to believe them all. We can evaluate them, we can weigh them up. But I don't see there's any threat to saying, let me just listen to what the Kashmiris say happened there. Let me just listen to what the Tibetans say happened there. If I go to India, which I have, and if I tour the monasteries, it will just be told me as fact in various Hindu and Buddhist monasteries that Jesus was here. Why should I feel threatened by that? I just don't think it is. And Jesus lived according to the canonical Gospels for 33 years, and we don't know anything about those years except for 3 years.
Right.
In Judea, in Palestine, and a couple of fragments from his early childhood up to the age of 12, lived in Egypt until he was 2 years old. Well, where's the rest? What was he doing for the rest of the time? I don't see it as any problem to say that other cultures on the planet can answer that question, or at least fill in some gaps.
Well, that's all the questions that I had. Thank you so much, Paul, for answering for me, man. I greatly appreciate it. And I always love seeing you whenever you come on, man. You always have great
Thanks, Zach.
wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Zach.
All right, everybody. Have a good night and have a happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, you too. Be romantic.
Yeah, we work. That's my wife works tomorrow. That's nothing romantic happening. So maybe I'll try to cook a crappy dinner.
That's a nice idea.
I'll admit I am not the best romantic guy. I know. Disappointing to you people, right? No.
Hey,
There's always time. There's always time.
I'm a female, and I am not into the whole Valentine's Day. I don't want cut flowers. I don't want cut roses. I say, if you're going to get me cut flowers, there's a substitute for that. But we don't need to go spend a bunch of money and do a bunch of stuff.
But so how much do you think, I mean, I've always been interested, the Rome and the Catholic religion, the Catholic Church has been around so long, collecting, I picture it like the warehouse in Indiana Jones, like they have their secret Vatican areas. Like, how much do you think they've known of all this when it comes to Jesus?
Oh, I think they know a lot about these things. It's just part of the history of the planet that there have been a lot of imperial conquests through the ages, and those generally involve sequestering local information, obliterating it for the public, and keeping it somewhere safe in a filing cabinet or a papal archive. And so I think there's a lot of information about planetary history, previous civilizations, the knowledge of previous cultures that can be found in the papal archives and in royal libraries around the world. I mean, one little smoking gun that I've been interested to follow up in Echoes of Eden is in the 1500s, there was a sudden flurry of interest in the corridors of power for developing remote viewing departments.
Or like John Dee.
Like John Dee, exactly. So John Dee was the guy who developed the remote viewing department for Queen Elizabeth I. And the timing of it is interesting because it was decades after the King of Spain had invaded Central and South America and sequestered all their ancient texts about human origins. And those texts say that our ancestors had powers of remote viewing. And we know that their shamanic traditions had protocols for reactivating that remote viewing. So that culture was raided, the libraries burned, choice copies go to the King of Spain, King of Portugal, and to the Pope. And then, surprise, surprise, we've got people like Queen Elizabeth I saying, I want a remote viewing department. So that's just a little for instance of specialized knowledge from our deep past being curated safely behind closed doors, the general public thinking it's all nonsense and woo-woo, or it's been debunked, while meantime it's being practiced in private in the corridors of power. And, 500 years later, it was the same situation when the CIA was running its remote viewing programs from
the Russians are doing it, we got to do it.
1975 to 1992. In public, it was nonsense. It was debunked. This is rubbish, or it's demonic. And in private, well, actually, that's part of our defense intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, we were totally into it. We spent millions of dollars on it. We relied on it. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that it was not just some foo-foo, like the menasteric goats, not real, kind of thing. We were actually using it for missions. We were using the intel. And I think we still are. I just think once it got made to light, then it was like, oh, we found no use in it. We're not doing it anymore. Bull crap.
And it follows the pattern you mentioned earlier, where they're not doing it anymore. Subcontractors are doing it.
Yep.
It just gives that other layer of distance and protection. But you mentioned John Dee, and he's rather interesting because he connects remote viewing with interdimensional contact. Because when Queen Elizabeth said, I want a remote viewing department, he did a number of things. And the first was he went to Europe to get hold of a book called the Steganographia by a German Benedictine monk called Johannes Trithemius. And that was a text that was all about encoding messages in plain sight, in texts that look like they're about one thing, but there's actually a hidden message in it. So they wanted that, very useful for espionage, but also in the book were protocols for remote communication and remote viewing. So Dee got hold of that book. Queen Elizabeth I said, I want you to actually make that work and start doing it. And, by the way, just a lovely detail, I should mention that John Dee's code number in the Royal Court was 007.
Yes. I'm a big Ian. I have all 13 Ian Fleming's hardback books. Yes, he did.
So obviously he knew this. So for M, think Majesty, and for James Bond, think John Dee. So John Dee is working on the Steganographia. He has to develop remote viewing because the Queen wants it. And the method that he and his assistant, Mr. Kelly, developed was one of creating altered states of consciousness to establish contact with transdimensional entities they called angels.
Yes.
And as I argue in The Scars of Eden, if we go back to the root meanings and we read the stories and what happens in them, we realize angels are not what we thought they were. That they are actually a being, every bit as much as we are, biological every bit as much as we are, but with advanced capabilities in travel and communication. So when John Dee says he's consulting angels and channeling thousands of pages of information from them, he's talking about contact with another kind of entity. Now, it could be physical, it could be energy-based, but it is certainly interdimensional contact that he's talking about. So right away, we're realizing that remote viewing for him was a modality of contact.
I mean, what I always find interesting about this subject with John Dee and Edward Kelly and the channeling of angels, and look, again, like Tesla getting flashes of information, and look at what the Nazis did with the Thal Society. They got into channeling and contacting entities and maybe got technology from it. It's like this is like a reoccurring theme throughout humankind.
Well, I think there's a connection between what you've just said about the German pursuit of that information and then what American government did when we suddenly had a spat of flying saucers in the wake of the Second World War. We tried to communicate with ships in our, I was going to say airspace, but our space, through channelers. And that is part of the story of our engagement with the UFO phenomenon, that at an intelligence level, a government level, it was thought that is the way you open hailing frequencies, through channelers.
And so we're reaching out to psychics and mediums. I mean, I always wondered if, like, the Eisenhower meeting that we've had, we've talked about on this show, Paul Blake Smith, we talked about, he had a book on that, came out like a year or so ago about the whole Eisenhower alien meeting. If that could have been set up just through that channeling. Like, how are we communicating with radios? I mean, what are we communicating? It was probably through a channel. It was probably through a remote viewer or a psychic.
And it's the old way, because if I can take it back to the New Testament for a moment, the writer of 1 John talks about it. He fully expects his readers to be in communication with entities that he never defines what they are, who they are, or where they're from. He just calls them spirits. And so that could be interdimensional spirits, could be ancestral spirits, could be other beings as material as you and me, but they communicate telepathically. And when you look at how the word spirit gets used in cultures around the world, doesn't necessarily imply an entity that isn't physical.
Right.
In some countries, spirits are funny little people who are smaller than us and who can fly. And so you go to New Guinea and there's a word that means moon spirit, and it's an entity that looks like a gecko. So it's not, this woo-woo invisible thing necessarily, but the writer of 1 John fully expects the early Christians to be in contact with other entities and getting good information from them.
And that's the thing. I mean, if the ability to remote view, to contact other entities, I mean, it would be limitless. You literally could be tuning into an alien on, Zeta Reticuli, or you can communicate with an alien on Venus, in another dimension. All possibilities are out the window. I mean, everything's possible at this point. So just the Nazis, who knows who they were communicating with? It might have been the same people that John Dee was communicating with. I remember getting into John Dee. I mean, he had some strange communications.
Yes, he did.
I mean, I remember one where where he was being told, and I think him and Edward Kelly kind of said, "Okay, we're not going to listen to this." Where they were telling him and Edward Kelly to switch wives.
Yes,
like do something strange like that, and they're like, "Oh no,
yeah,
like getting kind of kinky here, aliens or angels."
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason, because the writer of 1 John says, "Don't believe everything you're told. You get some good information, but filter it. Keep your own sovereignty, keep your autonomy, and if some entity comes along and says, do some wife swapping, you don't have to."
I always found that one. I know I bring that up because I always found that anecdotal, what happened with John Dee and Edward Kelly, like a bit kind of funny because it does seem like he's trying to talk him to do something for somebody's kinky pornography on the interdimensional channel.
And that's the problem of calling them angels.
Right.
If you have a label that's a bit more agnostic, entities or transdimensionals, then you are in a place where you can say, well, I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to do that. Call them angels, and you've got all this programming that says that angels do the bidding of the Almighty. You don't question the Almighty. That's why I think it's really important to demystify some of this language. If the text isn't about God, don't call it God, because call it God, and then you have to agree with it, approve of it, worship it. Call it an Elohim, and you can say that was a genocide and that was appalling. Same with the angel word as well. It's better to demystify, look at what was going on, so that we can make a call on it and say that was wrong, I don't agree with that, or I'm not going to do the thing that this being or person just told me I should do, because I think it's wrong. We are intelligent sovereign beings, and there's nothing in 1 John or Hebrews, which is another place in the Bible, that suggests we should ever give up our sovereignty to another entity just because it has got better tech than us.
I mean, John Dee was tried for heresy. I mean, he definitely wasn't public with a lot of this. It didn't come out till a long time later.
John Dee got into trouble when he did an astrological reading for Princess Elizabeth, as she was then. That's when she first hired him, when her half-sister Mary was still queen. Elizabeth wanted to accede to the throne, but she had to survive her sister's reign first, and that was not a given. So she hired John Dee, who was the darling of the academic world. He was very highly regarded by scholars of the day. She wanted an astrological reading for the Tudor family because she wanted an idea of how to navigate the next few years. He was
How
found
not to
out.
get killed.
He was arrested, exactly. He was put in the tower. And that's an illustration of the fact that what he was doing is regarded as witchcraft.
Exactly.
And if you did that in the 1500s, you could be executed for it. And yet you go into Elizabeth's reign, she's doing through him remote viewing. Well, you could be executed for that. But if you offer your skills to the Queen, well, you'll survive as long as she's Queen. Offer it to the general public, you'll end up on a witch's pyre. And that's just one example of one track of information for the powers and one for the general public. John Dee's story illustrates that because, unfortunately, after the death of Queen Elizabeth, he was no longer in favor. She was succeeded by a king, King James, who was more of a fundamentalist kind of Christian, and he regarded remote viewing as must be demonic.
Yeah.
And he didn't want anything under his name that could be associated with anything demonic, and so the department was shut down. Same reason it was shut down officially in the CIA. And John Dee was out in the cold, and he died in poverty because of that. It's a sad story in the end because he had been this shining light around Europe, so highly regarded and with such a privileged place in the court of Queen Elizabeth.
And it just shows, I mean, like I said, history does repeat itself somewhat, you know, because when it came to light in the 90s, really about remote viewing, it was like, oh, we're not doing it anymore and shutting it down. And there's nothing to it. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along. Even though it provided all this intelligence and we were totally using it, and definitely people in the higher ups, the DOD, they believed that it worked. It was giving them actual intel on things. So you think they gave that up? You think they really gave that up? No. Like you said, private contractors, just like UFOs. I mean, you know, at one point, the beginning of it, yeah, it was probably within our Pentagon and there were military generals who knew about it. But eventually they're like, too many people are going to talk about this congressional insight. Let's get this out of here. Get this out of here before Congress looks at it. And let's let you know, these private contractors do it. It's the same deal.
Yeah, that's right. So the information's out there on a need to know basis.
Yeah, on the need to know. Yeah. You don't need to know. You can't handle the truth. That's what it comes down to. I mean, imagine if people knew it was, this is real. You can remote view. You can do this stuff. Then, who's to say I can't remote view Area 51 or I can't remote view what's inside the Wright-Patterson base in Hangar 18?
Yeah, exactly. Or remote view the classified document on that minister's desk. I mean, no government wants that. So that's why they want a general story about remote viewing that is debunking.
Right.
And so I take my hat off to President Carter, who said openly, we used a remote viewer to find a downed jet in Zaire. That's how we located it. I applaud him for that because he is an evangelical Christian.
Yeah, exactly.
And in most evangelical churches, if you say you've been hiring remote viewers, you'll be shown the door. And it's a little illustration that if you're an evangelical in power, there's another story. You know that this is a human technology that's very useful and you might want to use it. General public evangelical, oh no, it's demonic. But he sort of let the cat out of the bag there, which I applaud him for. And
not the first time he's done that.
No, indeed. Remote viewing is probably something I reckon most people listening right now have had a glimpse of remote viewing at some point. Or something like it. They knew who was on the phone before they picked the phone up.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. Or they knew something had just happened to their daughter or their son, and then the call comes. We've all had glimpses and flashes of these experiences. And what our ancient texts tell us is that can be developed, that's actually our normal level of consciousness. That not having it is a diminution of our natural powers as human beings. And so part of the CIA story with remote viewing was they created a control group. I don't know if you know this story, just to evaluate whether it was worth paying their experts after all.
Right.
And they brought some people in with no previous experience of it, and they aced it, and they started getting information of strategic value from people who'd had no training in it. And that actually gave a greater reason to continue investing in the program from administration to administration, because it had to justify its funding. It could only do that if it worked. And it was maintained from President Nixon, President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan, President Bush, because it could justify the funding through results. And that's what I find very interesting.
Yeah, if it only lasted a year, it'd be like, okay, yeah, it didn't work. But it lasted a decade or more than a decade. It lasted a couple decades. And I still think they're doing it. I still think we're
so do I.
Heavily. Why would you give up that gold? Right. You can literally peer into anything and anywhere at any time. And the fact is, they don't even have to look for the Jedis out there to do it. They can train a normal person, an army, a person that's going to follow orders to do it and keep their mouth shut about it, too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the lady who found the down jet was a U.S. Air Force officer.
Yep,
that's
exactly.
where they found that person. And the director of the CIA knew about her. So that's just very interesting. But I think the moment came, I can't remember the year, was it 1992, when there was a new department chief who was responsible for oversighting the program. He was a fundamentalist Christian. He shut it down for that reason. And you can only imagine that another department picked it up. If he wasn't going to run with it, why would you lose it for defense intelligence if it was working? You would just
name your alphabet agency. They all probably have departments that are doing it.
Just
DOD,
move it down the corridor.
Yeah, NSA, CIA.
Yeah,
they're all doing. Even the FBI, has been shown that they've used certain people, mediums, or certain people in certain cases, and people they know they can go to. It's another tool in the box, and they're going to use it just because they know the enemy's using it. I don't know if China's using it, but I would think with their ancient traditions and their knowledge, they got their people. Russia got into it. They didn't have any dogma to hold them back on it. The way that when they were as a communist society, they didn't have the religious dogma. Like here, we have a guy who takes over. It's like they're talking to demons.
Yeah.
But in the end, the results are what matter, and they're not going to stop using that.
And what our ancestors say is they're only using something that's natural for all of us, that every one of us can develop this.
See, I've always wondered, too, like the story of the Tower of Babel, where, we get spread across and everybody can't talk to each other now. If that wasn't language, but humans literally telepathically communicated in our ancient past. And that's what that story is like, a very much representation of at some point where we lost that ability.
Well, I interpret the Babel story differently to that, but what you have just said is a story that's told in ancestral narratives. If you go to the Popol Vuh, it talks about the moment where we're downgraded so that we can be more easily managed. And the inference is that we did have better telepathic connection in the past than we do now. The Popol Vuh says that what happened was that the ET colonizers sprayed a vapor over human populations to brain damage us, so that our telepathic connections and our remote viewing, well, you wonder, don't you, and our remote viewing capacities are lost. But the wonderful thing about that story is that absent of toxins in the environment, our brains start working again, and we can start doing those things again. And that's not just in the Mesoamerican story, it's there in the story of Abasi and Atai that's told by the Efik people of Nigeria. They were the advanced beings presiding over our ancestors, and they again released devices into the environment to dumb us down. Again, the inference is absence of external harm, our brains work very well.
Right.
And we have these higher cognitive powers. That's our natural state.
So my worry is that it's happening now still. That, I'm not one of those like 5G towers. I mean, I have a worry about 5G, but there's other things, chemicals we're putting in our body, all this stuff. I mean, I'm horrible. I'm not living healthy. I know that. But all these things we're doing to ourselves is a way to suppress humans from evolving into this what we were meant to be.
Yes. Well, I think, it can sound very hopeless and apocalyptic when you say that, but if you were to do the tea ceremony that Plato did, for instance, in order to achieve transdimensional contact, he had to go on a fast first.
Right.
He had to clean up his diet, stop eating junk for a week, and then drink the tea. And that's the same with any tea ceremony. You have to do the fasting first. If you talk to any shaman about their protocols for achieving contact, whether it's for information or for healing, you'll find they're on a very controlled diet as well. And so I think, or if you go to someone who calls himself a psychic and you say, how do you maintain your sensitivity? And they'll say, oh, I'm pretty careful about what I eat. And they'll talk about a lighter diet. They'll talk about eating less meat, at least. They'll talk about drinking clean water, fresh foods, living foods. And these are all adaptations that we can make if we want to heighten our acuity. I think it's very practical, and I think it's within the reach of every person listening.
We do have somebody else on the phone here. I got my friend Dan. How you doing tonight, Dan?
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Doing good. You got a question for our guest tonight?
Yes, sir. I had a question. I was wondering if you had done a lot of research into Native Americans and as far as what, they believe in and their carvings and how it relates to everything else that you learned.
Dan, thanks for that question. I have done a little research in that direction, not so much into their symbology and into their carvings, but a little bit into their contact modalities and the way they seek to heighten those things. There is plenty of story of paleocontact among our Native American traditions, that's for sure. Some are very open, particularly people from the Iroquois Confederacy will talk about paleocontact in the beginning that showed them how to live in harmony with the planet, what plants were good for food, which were good to avoid, which were good for medicines, which were good for heightening consciousness. And my opening chapter in Echoes of Eden is the inside scoop on an experience of initiation. I tell the story, I call him Troy in the book. I've changed his name to protect the innocent. But what happened to my friend Troy when he was 13 years old and he got home from school one day and within hours found himself in a different state with another bunch of 13-year-olds being told to find water and shelter and we'll be back at some point to check on you. And that was just the beginning of months of initiation aimed at reprogramming him culturally, and then further ceremonies that were done to heighten his sensitivity to contact with and communication from other entities. So in the Native American tradition, you've got stories about the deep past, who we are, where we came from, how we live on the planet, and then stories about the planet, about the present, which are about developing our cognitive powers for health and healthy living. So I do go into it to that extent, and I think it's it's really telling what the Europeans did when they went into North America, when they illegalized Native American ceremony. Why would they do that if there wasn't power in it? Not just information, not just an alternative story, but if there wasn't power in it. There was a law passed in the United States of America, which was only repealed in my lifetime in 1978, that finally allowed Native Americans to start doing initiation and ceremony. But that was after 4 generations of stopping it.
Right.
Because they didn't want the information to survive. They didn't want that felt experience to survive. But it has survived. And that's where I go in Echoes of Eden. I encourage anybody to follow that white rabbit and listen to the expertise of our First Nation and Native American brothers and sisters.
Yeah, because they've been here far longer than we have, for sure.
Yes, they have. That's right. And I mean, it's very interesting if you go there or to Aboriginal Australian culture, you're looking at culture that is tens of thousands of years old as a continual culture. That ought to be reason enough to sit down and listen. But instead, we've done everything we could think of to stop it. We've illegalized the ceremonies. We've done stolen generations so parents can't teach their children. We've put children into children's homes, cut off their
they found out in
hair.
Canada.
Yeah,
just
I know.
recently.
Everything we're
Yeah.
discovering now, all the bodies we're unearthing,
Mm.
which was an attempted cultural genocide.
Yep.
Prosecuted by the churches. This is the horrible
Yeah.
scandal of it. You know, I talk a bit about what we did in Central and South America in the 1500s. Well, this has been done far more recently in Canada to try and extinguish this other culture because we are frightened of the power that culture carried in its initiation and in its ceremonies.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I had one more question for you before I get off here tonight.
Sure.
I was just wondering if you have ever seen a UFO in your life.
Yes, I have. Along with my daughter and my son and my wife, we saw a group of UFOs over Canberra. At first, we thought, "Oh, is that the Elon Musk satellites we're looking
Oh
at?"
yeah.
Because they were
Yeah.
moving in formation, and I thought, well, they could be satellites. But then they started moving in respect of each other and doing maneuvers.
Yeah.
So I've seen that. And I had some encounters when I was 20 years old that I talk about in my books that at the time I interpreted as either angelic or demonic encounters, because that was my grid. Your
perspective. Yeah.
That was my perspective. I didn't have any other boxes to tick. I was a young evangelical believer. If it's not, human, animal, vegetable, mineral, it must be demonic or
Yeah,
angelic.
that
So I
sounds similar. That sounds similar to me. Yeah.
But now looking back, I realize, no, that doesn't fit. And what happened doesn't fit. Now I realize that 1, 2, 3 of those were probably close encounters of the fourth kind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Similar for you, Dan?
well, I had an experience I talked about on Jason's show a while back, but I had experience with something, I don't know, strange, but I mean, in my heart of hearts, I don't think it was like an angel or but it was strange, but yeah.
Yeah.
But that's another story. But.
Sure.
Well, thanks, Paul. I will get off here. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, have a good night.
Have a good night. See, the one UFO I saw, the one I know, no doubt, not just me misidentifying something, because it was no way. It was this huge. I don't want to say cylindrical in a sense. But it was rectangular. It wasn't a round UFO. It wasn't a triangle shape. It was like just this no lights with like jigsaw pieces. And huge, that flew over me and my friends' heads when I was like 16. And I've always been so fascinated with the pillar in the sky in the Bible. If they ancients saw that, what I saw, and thought that was God, the pillar in the sky, I guess that kind of be what I saw, because it kind of looked like a junk stone pieces the way it was. I don't know, what ancients described to me when they talk about a pillar in the sky. Like, why would God need a pillar to travel in, or a ship?
Yeah.
What I saw, if ancients saw that, yeah, they think that's God. But the thing I saw, I knew that's not U.S. technology. There's no way anything we have is keeping something that big and massive just floating up in the sky, traveling along, that I saw. And ancients would have definitely no idea what they were looking at.
No, they wouldn't. Although, thankfully, some of the ancient texts are quite specific in describing what they're seeing. So they will describe a glass canopy over a cockpit in enough detail that you and I can say, whoa, I think I know what I'm looking at. They can describe the noise of the craft when it moves. And we think, yeah, it really does sound like a waterfall. This back in Ezekiel, of course.
Yeah.
If you go to the Popol Vuh, you've got descriptions of metal craft that can be seen from a distance in the sky, emitting a light from their fire that's so bright that it's brighter than the moon. And it's not hard to miss that that's a piece of technology that you're looking at. We are used to interpreting these texts in a spiritualized way when we read them in the Bible, and sometimes we're more ready to see it as technology when we read it in a foreign text, like the Popol Vuh. And once you've seen it there, you have to go back to your familiar text and say, this was a remote communication device, wasn't it? Or this pillar of fire, this was a craft with a tail of fire. That blast of wind, that makes sense when that thing launches. That whirlwind, that was a wormhole, wasn't it? We now have a grid to interpret what's described to us. And I'm grateful that the writers were faithful enough to describing what they saw, that even though intervening generations had no idea what they were talking about, we can go to the original text and say, I know what they're describing because I've seen something similar.
Well, even the fire on the mountain with Moses.
Absolutely. And he's being told he can't be out in the open when it launches. Well, we totally understand that in the 21st century.
And in his description of how he was changed when he came back, it like sounds like radiation burns, like stuff like that. I always like to think of like comparisons of people that have had UFO encounters, or like Travis Walton, or I'm forgetting the name of the case where the two women and a child were burnt by radiation from a UFO. Things like these encounters, and compare that to somebody like Moses's encounters or Ezekiel's encounters, and they're telling you the same thing. They're describing the same thing. We're just getting lost in the translation.
That's right. We're getting lost in the translation, but also we're interpreting it through paradigms without realizing that's what we're doing.
Tomato, tomato. You see alien, they saw God. But that's the thing. What drives me nuts though is that on a non-religious view, academia and archaeology, they're still ignoring all this. The mainstream academia.
Yes, for the most part, they are ignoring it, which I think is a great shame. I'm glad it's not wholesale. I'm glad NASA was able to find 24 priests and it could engage with in the conversation. And that was Princeton, wasn't it? I think they found those theologians in. So hats off to Princeton. They're having conversations about it. And really, my books are in part a provocation to the theological community to say, come on, come to the party. You've got a contribution to make here. If you could only just break the taboo and talk about stuff that was on the table 2,000 years ago, and there's no reason we shouldn't be talking about it now.
And that's the thing. It can't be. They can keep ignoring it, but for it's going to eventually build up. People are losing. I'm not saying that people are losing faith, but there are less people going to church. I think there's less people. People are opening up to new ideas. You can't keep preaching the same dogma over and over again and just ignoring these things. And same thing for academia. People are not taking archaeology, going to take our archaeologists serious anymore. Is not going to take a look at these unanswered questions we've had for so long.
That's exactly right. And a lot of people who contact me are believers. They're from a faith background. Sometimes they've come out of that because they've had experiences that they're not allowed to mention, or their community can't explain, and it's a taboo, or they've seen things in the texts and interpreted it a different way, like me, and they're told, sorry, that's not welcome here. But they still need to go and think further and process their experiences. And I think there's a massive shift happening in our culture at the moment. I'm blown away by the number of older people in their 70s and 80s who are contacting me and saying, I don't buy into the old explanations anymore. I know there's more going on than we're told about, and I know there's more in our Bible and our ancient texts than we've been allowed to discuss. And by the way, something happened to me when I was 15, and I've never spoken about it before. So there's a lot of shifts happening there for people who are talking about experiences they haven't spoken about before, sharing views that they've held for a long time but can't discuss, but then still others whose views are shifting and who believe something different now than they did 10 years ago. And it's that aspect I find really, really interesting, because I don't think that's normal. I think you tend to get set in your thinking as you get older, but I'm hearing so many people saying, I am considering things I've never considered before. And I find that really exciting.
Yeah, I do think we are living in a very exciting time. Sometimes too exciting, but I definitely
Well,
witnessed this with people that have opened their minds. I never thought would to it, and that's why I do the show, is to open people's minds. We're going to go to our last commercial break. Phone lines will be back open when we come back with our guest Paul Anthony Wallis. We'll talk more about his upcoming book Echoes of Eden, and the phone lines will be right back open when we come back from the short commercial break.
Intercepted a transmission of unknown origin.
Transmission? Out here?
SOS.
Human.
Unknown.
Alien. Certificate X. Exclusive engagement at the Odeon Leicester Square. Now.
Any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated. I don't want to hear it.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
If you are interested in discovering the truth about the paranormal and want to hear from leading researchers in the field, join Justin Brown on his 3 weekly shows named My Paranormal Soapbox, Necromancer Live Show, and the Supernatural Symposium, live on Facebook, YouTube, and
This is an APAC studio presentation.
Hi, I'm Barry, owner-operator of Barry's Barometer Barn. Lately, I bet you've been lying awake at night asking yourself, how many barometers do I really need? Well, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we think you need more than one. Otherwise, we're gonna go out of business. Remember, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we don't know the meaning of high-pressure sales. Come on, folks, buy another barometer. I'm trying to put my kids through college, I've got a family to support, and a secret mistress who isn't cheap.
Visit Barry's Barometer Barn, 000 Storm Drive. Come on, folks, buy a barometer. I'm Barry's older brother, Larry, and every time one of you people walk past the store without coming in, Barry beats me.
This has been a presentation from Tim Morgan's APAC Studio. For more almost professional amateur comic studio content, visit the APAC YouTube channel. Search APAC 2002. That's APAC 2002 on YouTube.
When Alex Gardner is asleep, he has an extraordinary gift. The government wants it, the scientists want it, but to keep it may cost him his life. It might be better if Alex didn't sleep at all, but he cannot resist entering the dreamscape. Can you? See Dreamscape in the West End and all over London now. Certificate 15. It takes an extraordinary adventurer to enter the dreamscape.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You could accept the fact that this city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
What do you mean, biblical?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
You're listening to Paranormal Soup, bringing you the weird every Sunday night. Call into the show and join the discussion. The call-in lines are 219-230-4444 or 260-225-9419. Or by Skype caller ID OOJBland00 or JBland Paranormal Soup. And now to your host, Jason Bland.
Tonight's guest has been Paul Anthony Wallis. We're talking about his upcoming book, Echoes of Eden. He's also the author of Escaping from Eden and The Scars from Eden. The Echoes of Eden will be out this May. I cannot wait to read it. The phone lines, let me make sure they're back open for you guys if you want to call in and join the discussion tonight. What's your thoughts on ancient aliens? Are aliens now? Are they here? You believe it? What about revelations in the Bible? We haven't even talked about that tonight. We talked about remote viewing. Is Revelations a remote view of our future to come? I hope not. I've had a lot of people in the last couple of years, and maybe I don't know why, but say they feel like we're living in the end times. I'm not one of those people who believe that, but I can see where people get that. Let me get Paul's opinion on that tonight, but your opinions matter too. Call into the show, join the discussion, but let's go ahead and get back to our guest. So I don't know, Paul, if you've had the experience I had over the last couple of years, but I've had a lot of people tell me they believe they're living in the end times. I've had guests on that say we're living in the end times. Are you, as a Christian, what's your feeling on like Revelations and the end times and the kind of the darker side of that story?
Well, Revelation is a fascinating text that I think has layers of information in it. So I think aspects of it are what you were just saying, that there is future viewing in it.
Right.
But there's also what's really past viewing for us, because some of the language around the beast is a reference to the Roman Empire.
Nero?
And to Nero, that's right.
Yeah.
So you've got a layer of story that is really a rebuff to the Roman narrative and a rejection of it, and a rejection of the principles of empire embodied by the Roman Empire. But because it is that, it is describing dynamics which exist in every age. Whatever the age, whatever the empire, the dynamics are the same. And so when you've got this power play that's described, and permission to trade and the way the global economy works described, it's going to be true in every generation. And so I think there's a sense in which we've been in the end times since that book was written. And there are always correlations that you can find between what's happening now and what's described there. That's part of the genius of the book. But I do think there is some future viewing in it as well, and maybe some past viewing. There's a very intriguing moment, for instance, when we're told that we're going to be given a sighting of the New Jerusalem, and we're expecting to see a city, but what's described is a cube with artificial lighting that can sustain life and be populated by tens of thousands of people that will then move to an area of space that's completely unfamiliar to us, and beneath us it looks as if the planet Earth has just been rolled up and popped down a hole. What does that sound like to you?
The Borg?
It sounds like a Borg cube, only a little bit nicer,
Right.
It sounds like a what's the term for it? Breakaway civilization.
Yeah.
Is that the past? Is that the future? If we go to Ezekiel again in a later chapter, we hear something that's described as a temple. And the viewer is fascinated that it seems to generate its own light and that it has plant life growing in it, enough to sustain a human population. And again, I'm thinking, oh, is that a breakaway civilization that's come here, that's now being viewed by Earthlings? Because if you saw a huge spacecraft on the planet's surface, you could only describe it as a building. And the only building you'd have seen that size would have been a temple. So obviously it's a temple. And then how would you describe streets of artificial materials that are absolutely smooth and cool, where you would say that was marble or metal, or you would approximate it to something? Or if you're looking at a dashboard of flashing lights, well, those are jewels, aren't they? And if you're looking at artificial light, oh, it's in perpetual day, etc., etc. So it's not hard for us to spot a situation that may be a craft from a breakaway civilization or a craft for a breakaway civilization described in the deep past. And I think Revelation is an example of that.
Did you ever see the revamp of Battlestar Galactica?
No, I haven't. I know I should.
I don't want to spoil things, but you totally should. Like you,
right.
and really the payoff won't be until the very end of the, what is it, 4 seasons or 3? I can't remember. It was a beautiful story arc, but the payoff that I want you to get to isn't until the very end. I don't want to give that away. All I can say is that the end is the beginning is the end. It's all cylindrical.
Yeah.
And we make the same mistakes over and over again. Is basically the point. It was a beautiful story arc. Like, it's one of those few things in science fiction where the recreation or the revamp is better than the original.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Oh, I will watch it on your recommendation, Jason.
And plus, it's got Katie Sackhoff in it. I got a crush. Starbuck in there, just so you know. But yeah, I want you to see it because, like I said, you get to the end of it, and the way that they end it, I don't want to spoil it, but it is this cylindrical thing where basically you could give the same Revelation or Armageddon story, it's going to repeat.
Yes. And I think, it's a very resonant story, and I think it's worth asking the question, why do we keep retelling this kind of story? I'd encourage people to watch the Marvel Universe, what's happening there right now.
With the parallel universes, the multiverse.
There you hear all sorts of ancient stories, ancient narratives. I was watching The Eternals the other day with my kids, and I kept interrupting the movie saying, that's in my book, that's in my book.
I haven't seen that yet.
And in the end, I had to leave the room so they could watch the movie properly.
Like, Dad, go away with your ancient alien stuff. Come on.
There's a very deliberate retelling of these stories.
Yes.
Why do we listen to them? Why are they so resonant? I think that's a question worth pursuing.
Well, you can look at Superman. In the DC side. I'm a DC guy, so. But you can look at Superman as just a retelling of, all these other stories. I mean, it's fictional. It could be, Superman could be Hercules, in a sense. I mean, except that he wasn't mated with a human, but in the sense that, he is alien. And come here, and he's has all he's a nephilim, or he's got superpowers. I mean, our superheroes today were the superheroes of the of the Titans.
Yes, exactly. And what I love in the Marvel universe is you've got a few ordinary people who, through some accident, have got a capability that we all feel we really should have, and that our ancestral narratives say our ancestors did have. I mean, you know, a real comic strip superpower is X-ray vision. Well, the Popol Vuh says there was a time when our vision didn't stop at the surface of things.
Right.
So to me, that's the same thing.
I was always fascinated. Parapsychologist, and you know, an aspect of him I didn't know about for many years is Barry Taff. He's a parapsychologist. I worked out at UCLA, and you know, early on the entity case and all that. But he, as a child, had X-ray vision. He and to this day still does. Like he had, you know, and his actual real vision's real bad. But like he can see through and see things in people like sicknesses and cancers.
Yes,
He's had this experience
yes,
over
exactly.
and over and over again since he was a child. And that's an ability that, you know, he's a scientist, that he thinks of these things not in some foo-foo way. He tries to think of rational ways of why he has that ability, and he's studied this phenomenon for years. But it's an ability he has.
It is very related to self-healing, that ability to see beyond the surface, to see into somebody's body. And yes, there are plenty of healers, shamanic and otherwise, around the world who say that that is one of their key modalities.
Yeah, I mean, you know, all these superpowers we've been, you know, I mean, for me, it's Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I remember, you know, ever since I was a little kid, trying to move something with my mind. You know, like trying to do, you know, like you know what Yoda says is, you know, size matters not. You know, I'm like, okay, I'm trying, Yoda. You know, as a kid, I believe these things are possible. I still do. I mean, I still believe people can move things with their mind. People can see through things. People can do all kinds of incredible things that reality generally tells us we can't. But reality isn't what we think it is. That these abilities are all there.
And there's another Anunnaki connection there, isn't there? In Anakin Skywalker, it's a beautiful name.
Skywalker, yep.
Aptly chosen. And then there's an overlap in the storytelling there of deliberately retelling ancient stories, and then I think channeling while you're storytelling. I think sometimes we do it not knowing that's what we're doing. Sometimes we do it quite consciously.
In a galaxy a long time ago, far, far away.
I think that's
maybe it
how
really happened.
Well, I think that's how something like the Death Star suddenly appears in the story, because that was years before we'd seen Mimas or Iapetus to know that anything like that existed. We'd never seen it, but it's there in Star Wars. And I think there's a little clue there that there's some kind of privileged information that I think happened through channeling to create the Death Star as we know it.
That this existed, you know, that I honestly, I always say I believe our moon might be a Death Star. It's artificial.
Yes. Well, I've heard a few people say that. And again, ancestral narratives, just as interested in the moon as we are today.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, the mainstream scientific view is that we didn't always have the moon, that it was captured by the Earth's gravity. That's the mainstream view. And so really, we should raise an eyebrow when we go to an ancient mythology like the Zulu mythology that has a story about the moon arriving, or to ancient Roman and Greek poets and writers who talked about the time when the moon arrived. You know, before the last few decades, we would have just said, oh, what a fanciful idea. Now we've got science saying, actually, there was a time when the moon wasn't here, and it was captured, and it would have been cataclysmic when it arrived. And it is strange, isn't it, that it's perfectly positioned to exactly eclipse the sun on a periodic basis. It is odd, isn't it, that we've got something that big in this perfect anomalous orbit. It is odd that it always faces us with the same face showing. There's a lot to be explored there.
I'm so fascinated by the moon, and now we have, you know, like China supposedly is up there. I say supposedly because, I mean, we got people still to this day arguing, did we actually go to the moon? You know, I don't know what to tell. I mean, I hear both sides of that argument, and I don't know what to think. I hope we did. I hope we went there. We spent a lot of money to go there. I hope we went.
I believe we did, and I
do.
I go to Ed Mitchell and I look at how he lived his life and the things he said and his passionate campaign for disclosure, I don't think he's lying
Me
about
neither.
his time on the moon.
I always point out Neil. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
In fact, he goes even further, and he does share some classified information opaquely, obliquely. I've got a story in Echoes of Eden of when he was on the moon surface with Alan Shepard, their second moonwalk. They did their first. They couldn't sleep, so it was only a few hours before they did their second. But by the time they did their second, there were footprints over the top of their own footprints. I know that from the person who read that off the telex that came through to the space tracking station that he worked at that time.
Because they said it out loud.
So I trust him. I believe he was part of a sequence of manned missions to the moon. I think one of the reasons a lot of people are skeptical is I think there was something off about the film footage we were treated to.
Yeah.
And I think that throws people off the scent. I think people believe none of it happened because the film, there's something odd about it. But I think if we hadn't gone, if we hadn't actually gone, then I don't think we would have gone for the subsequent missions. We would have said, look, we did it. We beat the Russians. Bingo.
We don't want to get caught twice doing the same gimmick.
We won't go again. You wouldn't go several times if it was fake.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning of my logic there. I think keeping it this silent for so long, if it were all fake, I just don't think it was possible. I think there are other secrets.
I've thought we might have faked a couple missions afterwards for funding real. Maybe
it is possible, but I think that there is other information. People know there's something fishy about the story. They can smell the fish, but I think it's other secrets that have been kept.
I love influencing young minds. I got a lot of young 20-somethings that work with me at my job, and I had this one girl, and we were just getting to this subject. I'm like, well, have you ever seen the press conference after Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin come back from the moon? Have you ever seen that? No. I said, go watch that. And then I want you to come back to me. And I got her the YouTube video of it. I said, I want you to come back to me after everything we were just talking about and tell me what you think about that. Exactly. She comes back. She goes, that was really weird. They were very sad or something. I'm like, now how do you think if you went to the moon, you got there and you saw evidence of ancient aliens or aliens are there, or you found out some amazing news for humanity while you got there, but you're told you never talk about it when you come back. How would you feel coming back talking about that?
You would feel like they look.
Yep.
In that video. I absolutely agree. They look sad.
Swallowing
they look
vomit,
sick.
basically.
They look angry. They look scared. I agree. I think everybody should look at that, and they'll come away knowing something is off.
Right.
So some people watch that and they say, "Oh, obviously they're lying. They didn't go."
No,
or
I don't think that at all.
Something they're desperately trying not to say. That's how I read it.
And that's why I think you see frustration like out of Buzz Aldrin when he punched a guy. When he said he never went there. I think he wouldn't have punched him if he actually never went there. He'd be like more sad about it. But I think he got angry. It's like, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I can't even tell you, you dumb idiot. People need to wake up. Like they would have to look at what Neil Armstrong did with his life afterwards. He got fascinated with ancient cultures. He traveled.
Yeah.
Why? Why did he suddenly get fascinated with ancient cultures? Because probably he went there and he saw that there was something ancient there. That means they've been here for a long time.
He did. And Ed Mitchell got fascinated with raising human cognitive powers and campaigning for disclosure on free energy. So join the dots.
Yeah, exactly. They're not the only ones. And now you mentioned NASA bringing in these theologians. It's like, what's coming? What do you know? I don't know. I don't know what to believe if we're on the verge. I mean, you got Uri Geller out there saying it's going to happen. Like aliens are going to make contact. I don't know if that's going to happen in my lifetime, or my children's lifetime. I really don't know. But I do feel like we are on the verge of something, maybe. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot.
May I interrupt one moment? We've had a member on YouTube chat, Matrix Minds, who's been wanting to ask a couple questions. And before we end.
Let's see. Prehistory, prior to humanity. I'm trying to get this.
It's this bottom one here.
Matrix Minds. Paul's thoughts on Timet, prehistory prior to humanity on planet Earth's seeding. I'm sure you had other questions I'm looking for here.
Prior to humanity on planet Earth.
He said not to worry about the other question because you guys had changed to gears.
That happens. It's
Yeah.
Paranormal Soup. Yeah, we do that a lot.
Well, Matt, thank you for that question. I think one of the exciting and or disturbing things that I've concluded from my time in ancient texts, and certainly my time with Plato, is that planet Earth has been home to a sequence of civilizations, and that it's not the story of panspermia arriving on planet Earth and a little while later is you and me. I think I believe in panspermia, which says that life is the rule in the cosmos, not the exception, and that the genetic coding for biological intelligent life is throughout the cosmos, that whenever it lands in an hospitable environment, it will generate forms of life similar to those with which we're familiar here. And I believe that's happened a number of times on this planet. So when we're talking about previous civilizations, I think we're talking about pre-human civilizations. And some of our ancient stories, whether it's the Tiamat stories from out of Sumeria or others around the world, may be recollections not of our beginnings, but of the beginnings of previous civilizations. So Plato had information about an Atlantean civilization. The stories the Sumerians told were not about what was happening around them then and there, but about the deep past. If you go to Genesis chapter 9, it says it was in the generation of Peleg that the continents divided, if I can go to the root meanings of the words. Well, that's not in the timeline of Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
Or if we go to Genesis 11, it says there was a time when all the lands had a single coastline. Well, that's Pangaea. Homo sapiens wasn't here then. So I think we really are looking at civilizations that we know nothing about other than this information that's been fed to us and that exist in those sources. Civilizations that would be ground to a powder on planet Earth by now. We'd know nothing about them. So I think that may be the seeding we know about from ancient story. I think sometimes when we're reading the Sumerian story, it's possible. Certainly when you were reading South American Andean story of beginnings, there is a mix of stories. There's our beginnings, and then there's the previous civilization's beginnings. There's human origins, and then there is solar system origins, and they are all fused into the same story because there are hints in the stories of cataclysmic events taking place in our solar system, with planets interfering with each other, with Saturn playing a role on planet Earth to rival the influence of the sun. Well, that hasn't happened in the timeline of Homo sapiens, but it seems to be part of the story. So I know I'm not answering your question very well or very directly, but I am saying that I believe the planet was seeded long, long before the beginnings of life on Earth as we know it today.
The curious thing is as we venture out into space, specifically Mars, and on our own moon, if we actually get our butts back up there, but especially Mars, being that it could have been another whole other ancient civilization we are from.
Yes.
The possibilities of that, or that there's still something there. I don't know. That's and. You get into the remote viewers like Ingo Swann, who remote viewed the moon, and he saw aliens still there.
Yeah. I mean, Ingo Swann is a person to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Because it was he who remote viewed the rings of Jupiter before any of us had even imagined it would have rings. We knew about the rings of Saturn, not Jupiter, and he remote viewed them 9 months before we got the first glimpse of them photographically. So if he's saying he thinks it's not just the Chinese up there, then, well, I might take that seriously and want to look into that. And same on Mars. I find Mars really intriguing because I just try to imagine what would be the psychological impact on us if the human story suddenly extended to Mars. If what we found were artifacts that look like our own ancient cultures, that would be kind of more mind-blowing than to say, oh, there was another species visited there once. Because suddenly it's us, it's our own story that has to change and adapt to assimilate this new information.
And everything's cyclical. We're destroying this planet. And we're going to go back to Mars and try to make it better again. It's like, do we keep jumping back and forth? We ruin this planet, so we can go and we're going to make this planet new and better and new civilization and destroy that planet and then keep going back and forth. You know, you wonder how much of this is cylindrical that we keep doing. We keep going around the same circles.
That's very true. But, you know, I would love to see that moment. I've enjoyed watching Henry Louis Gates Jr. on Ancestry, where he introduces people to some of their ancestral stories, and you see the emotional impact on people when suddenly they get a little bit of information about their great-great-grandfather and their great-great-grandmother. What would it do to us if suddenly we had a whole new insight on who we are and who our ancestors really were?
Right. Maybe to bring us together a little bit better.
I hope so.
You know, you would hope. Instead of, you know, Ronald Reagan's famous alien threat speech, maybe an alien grandfather would bring us together more, you know, than a threat.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes,
Either one.
definitely.
I'd rather the grandfather thing than the threat. But the other, you know, we're almost going to run out of time. But, you know, the other question is, like, when it comes like the ancient aliens of the past, like the Elohim or the Anunnaki, you know, it seems like they left, but there is some alien presence here. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I feel like whatever presence is here now, maybe you agree or disagree with that, is more like the Federation. It's like, you know, prime directive, no contact, and they're trying to kind of police things and get the, you know, whatever was going on with Anunnaki and the Elohim, things were kind of out of control. Like they came here, they took a bunch of, you know, the primates and turned them into working, more functional slaves that they could use, and some Federation came in here and said, okay, you guys are way out of line.
Yeah, enough of that.
Yeah,
Enough of
that's
that.
what I
That's
wonder.
right.
I think about.
Well, I agree. And I think our ancestral narratives paint that picture, that there are entities here who are on the lookout for us, who love human beings, who have a nurturing relationship with us. And one of the reasons that there's an intergalactic federation with a hands-on role, as Hayem says, is that it needs policing, because unfortunately there are some others out there who are more interested in the planet than they are in the people, and who don't like human beings or who are totally indifferent to us. So we need that federation. We need that balance of power. I am grateful for those who are here looking out for us, and I'm grateful for those who do communicate with us, because I do believe we are in contact, not just at a covert government level, as Hamish says. I believe ordinary people are getting communications all the time. I am encouraged that it's there in the New Testament, encouraging people to expect contact. And that's kind of my take home from all this, that we can expect to be in contact, and we can expect some of that contact to be benevolent and to be getting some good information on how we navigate this next period of our history.
And I always say in this show is I don't ever think there actually will be a disclosure from our governments. I think the real disclosure movement's us. And
yes,
our
it has to be grassroots. It's a
Yeah.
fool's errand waiting for the big announcement.
Right,
But
exactly.
if we listen to one another without prejudice, I think there's plenty of disclosure happening already.
Exactly. Well, Paul, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Your new book, Echoes of Eden, it's May 1st is the release
1st of
date.
May, that's right.
Yeah, I cannot wait to get a copy of that book, and it sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to have you on again, as always. You're one of my favorite guests to have, so thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jason. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me today.
All right, guys, that is it for the show. We will be back next Sunday with Karen V. Johnson with her book, Living with Grieving, talking about how to live with grieving, with connecting with those on the other side. I mean, we had a lot of shows like that this year, but I've had a lot of friends and a lot of people lost in the last year or two. They're going through grieving, so I think this is important to talk about. When we come back next Sunday, same bad time, same bad channel, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Central, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific time. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Follow, subscribe, tell your friends, keep sharing the show. Thank you to everybody who does share the show out to their friends and on their timelines. It's a big help. Keep telling people about Open Place Forum where we can talk about the strange and unusual and explore reality together every Sunday night, same time. All right, guys, see you next week. Have a great night.